Chapter 1056. Long Fei Yi tugged at Chu Shifeng's arm, causing him to stiffen all over. "Relax," Han Yunqi said. Chu Shifeng couldn't relax no matter what. Long Fei Yi seemed to sense his nervousness as well and stood up cold. "Su Donglin, go give him a hand." Su Donglin's eyes were red and swollen. He obeyed Boss Chu's orders and didn't cry, but tears still welled up in his eyes. Besides disrespecting the princess on his own accord, Boss Chu had always been someone he admired and respected. In fact, he'd long treated him as his own big brother. He had been secretly rejoicing, thinking that he'd be able to see Boss Chu once they reached the peak of Celestial Mountain. He'd even been thinking of ways to persuade Boss Chu to give in to the princess and beg for her forgiveness. As long as the princess forgave him, His Highness wouldn't say a word. In the future, Boss Chu would still be a member of the Shadow Clan. Although Boss Chu didn't know martial arts, he had followed His Highness freely and knew more than anyone else in the Shadow Guard. Boss Chu could lead them all the same. But who knew he'd be injured to this extent? Han Yunqi examined him carefully and quickly concluded, "Both legs are crippled. Both calves suffered comminuted fractures. Too much time has passed, so we'll have to ask Gu Beiyue if they can be cured." Chu Shifeng lay on his back, too afraid to open his eyes. He didn't even dare to think about it, but he couldn't help but wonder if the princess had forgiven him. He always knew he was in the wrong. Acting on his own was a mistake and a taboo as a Shadow Guard. But he never regretted it, because he couldn't forget the hatred of his ancestors. Until Su Donglin wrote a letter to Celestial Mountain and told him the truth about the Great Qin Empire's internal strife. Only then did he realize that all the hatred was a misunderstanding and that the princess was innocent. He was willing to accept His Highness's exceptions for her. Only then did he realize he'd made a mistake beyond redemption. After finding out the truth, he stopped writing to Su Donglin. He hesitated for a long time and wanted to go down the mountain to find the princess several times. He knew better than anyone else that as long as the princess agreed, His Highness would agree to anything. But he didn't. He lived day after day on the top of Mount Tianshan. Not for anything else, but because he thought he was already a cripple. How could a Shadow Guard without his martial arts be called a Shadow Guard? He even had to be carried down the mountain. It wasn't until the head of the Tianshan Kenzo top 3 schools and their disciples betrayed them, and the evil sword school attacked the top of Tianshan Mountain that he realized that he should do something for Her Highness. The top 3 schools had first taken control of the Shadow Guard training base before luring the people from the evil sword school to the top of the mountain. He wasn't at the training base at that time, so he managed to escape. No one paid attention to a cripple like him, which was why he could hide for so long. When the snow and ice blocked the road, they would slide down from the west side. Han Yunqi wrapped Chu Shifeng's arm and asked, "Does it hurt?" Chu Shifeng suddenly opened his eyes and met Han Yunqi's gaze. Subconsciously, he averted his eyes. "Does it hurt?" Han Yunqi asked next. "It doesn't," Chu Shifeng replied. Han Yunqi abruptly wrapped his arm. "How about this? I don't feel anything. When I went down the mountain, my right hand hit a rock and broke it. I tried to catch it myself, but I don't think I connected it properly," Chu Shifeng said honestly. Han Yunqi knitted her brows and didn't say a word. Instead, she checked his other hand, which was fine. After checking his bones, Han Yunqi began to press on Chu Shifeng's abdomen to check for internal injuries. As soon as she did, Chu Shifeng cried out in pain. How could a martial arts practitioner cry out in pain so easily? Unless the pain was really unbearable. Han Yunqi furrowed her brows while Su Donglin's eyes grew redder and redder. Long Fei Yi watched from the sidelines, his expression growing colder and colder. By Yanqing, Evil Sword School, and the rebels from the 3 great colleges, he wouldn't let a single one of them off. Han Yunqi couldn't take it anymore by the end of her examination. She couldn't imagine how Chu Shifeng had endured so much pain and starved his readers until now. Not daring to delay any longer, she said, "Long Fei, he needs liquid hot food. Also, arrange for a carriage to send him to Gu Beiyue's place as soon as possible. Otherwise, I don't know if he'll be able to keep his life." Chu Shifeng looked spirited, but his internal injuries were very serious. Han Yunqi didn't know much about internal medicine, so the only thing she could do was ensure Chu Shifeng's safety and receive professional treatment as soon as possible. Boss? Su Donglin, who hadn't dared to speak this entire time, finally couldn't take it anymore as tears streamed down his face. Seeing this, Chu Shifeng immediately scolded. Stinkin' brat. How much should I tell you dash before he could finish? Long Fei Yi cut him off. Su Donglin, Long Fei Yi said, send a letter to Gu Beiwei and tell him to hurry over. Have Tang Li keep an eye on three-way black market. Gu Beiwei would arrive much faster than Chu Shifeng. Moreover, they needed more people to climb Celestial Mountain. Master, this subordinate is fine. This subordinate. Chu Shifeng was cut off again, this time by Han Yunqi. You're still fine when you're already like this? Do you want to die? Fine, before you die you have to clear your debt with this princess. Chu Shifeng gave a start at her words. He didn't know how to reply. Han Yunqi glared at him, looking a bit like a debt collector. Chu Shifeng fell silent before preparing to turn over. What are you doing? Long Fei Yi asked unhappily. Your Highness, this subordinate acted on his own initiative and was disrespectful to the princess. This subordinate will apologize to the princess, Chu Shifeng said with his head bowed. Han Yunqi felt her heart ache at the sight. How could there be right and wrong in anything? Now that she looked into it, what had Chu Shifeng done wrong? Who didn't remember the grudges of their ancestors? Who could be so submissive to their enemy? Lie down properly. Han Yunqi was fierce. She took out a pill from her medical pouch and said coldly, Here, this is poison. Once you take it, you'll have to endure the pain of 10,000 ants gnawing at you for 2 hours. If you eat it now, I'll forgive you. From now on, we'll both forget about that incident. You can still be His Highness's servant like before and listen to my orders from time to time. How about it? Besides Chu Shifeng, everyone present could tell what the pill was. Su Donglin was so moved that he stopped crying and looked anxiously at Chu Shifeng, afraid that he'd refuse. Bailey Mingxiang was nervous as well. Chu Shifeng stared at the pill and didn't move. Long Fei Yi looked over as well. Everyone was waiting. As for Gu, he didn't have a good impression of Chu Shifeng at all. Back when he'd wanted to visit Poison Lass at the Duke of Qin's estate and give her some gifts, it had always been that damned brat Chu Shifeng and his shadow guard chasing after him. If not for the fact that Chu Shifeng had done meritorious service as a snitch, Gu would have killed him long ago. By now, Gu had already returned to the cave. Outside, Chu Shifeng had been thinking for a long time without making a move. It had to be said that Han Yunqi was a little disappointed by his lack of consideration. But Chu Shifeng only looked timidly at Long Fei Yi and asked in a low voice, Will Your Highness forgive me too? Han Yunqi couldn't help but laugh at his words. In the past, she'd felt that Chu Shifeng had turned into an old man after that incident. He was no longer the same person she knew. Still, Han Yunqi knew that he hadn't changed at all after hearing his question. Han Yunqi took the initiative to answer for Long Fei Yi. Of course. Naturally, Long Fei heard her, but he simply stood loftily on the sidelines without a word, tacitly agreeing. All right, I'll take it. Chu Shifeng was very decisive. He stuffed the pill into his mouth and chewed a few times before forcing it down. Everyone looked at him without saying a word. Chu Shifeng didn't speak either, but lay back down and exhaled in relief as he stared at the skies. Actually, he was terrified that he'd die a mysterious death before leaving Celestial Mountain. But now, even if he was poisoned to death, there was nothing to regret. Chu Shifeng quietly waited for the poison to take effect and the pain of 10,000 ants gnawing at him. Everyone else gathered around him in silence, waiting for the dragon pill to take effect. That's right, Han Yunqi's medicinal pills weren't poisons at all. Instead, they'd gone through all sorts of twists and turns and risked their lives multiple times to get the dragon pill back. There were only 2 left, one of which had gone back to Gu Beiwei. This was the last one. If Chu Shifeng knew the origins of these medicinal pills, what would he think? Would he still pursue the matter of right and wrong? Would he even need to ask whether His Highness and the princess would forgive him? Gradually, a warm current flowed from his dantian like a ball of true qi rising from his dantian and spreading throughout his body. As the energy coursed through his body, Chu Shifeng felt as if his cold, wounded body was being protected. He felt like he was being reborn. Now he was stunned. What's going on? He looked at Han Yunxi in confusion, but Han Yunxi had already risen to her feet. This isn't poison, but the dragon pill. Chu Shifeng, remember this, you'll always owe me a debt. In the future, serve me well. As Han Yunxi spoke, she headed back into the cave. She had to find a way to cook some hot food. Even if she had to wait for Gu Beiyue, she had to take care of Chu Shifeng's body as much as possible. Long Fei Yi followed her inside, leaving Su Donglin and Chu Shifeng outside. Once the two masters were gone, Su Donglin couldn't help but throw himself into Chu Shifeng's arms and sob. Boss Chu, you scared me to death. Sob Zub. You can finally come back. Chu Shifeng stared blankly at the skies. Get the dragon pill back? Did I hear wrong? Boss Chu, His Highness and the rest almost lost their lives for the sake of getting the dragon pill back. The princess treats you very well. Don't fuss over the past, all right? Su Donglin was always like a child in front of Chu Shifeng. Very soon, Long Fei Ye's orders reached their ears. Why aren't you bringing them in yet? They were at the foot of Celestial Mountain. Although it was hidden, they couldn't afford to be careless. Since Bai Yanqing didn't know they were coming, they had to come up with a plan to kill them all and rescue Kenshin and the three honored elders so they could take back Celestial Mountain. Chapter 1057. Han Yunxi and the rest waited in the cave for Gu Beiyue to arrive while asking around for information on Tianshan Kenzo and the Evil Sword School. Actually, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi didn't think much of the Evil Sword School. Their main concern was whether or not Bai Yanqing was on the mountain. I've only seen the Evil Sword School's leader once. He had his face covered, and I saw him from a distance. I couldn't see his face clearly, Chu Shifeng thought back, then said with certainty. He should be over 50 years old. He's been on the mountain this entire time? Han Yunxi asked. Chu Shifeng couldn't be sure. I haven't seen him since they attacked the peak. Long Fei Yi glanced at Gu and said cold. You keep watch tonight. I'll go scout the way first. Chu Shifeng had limited information, so it was better to go up the mountain himself instead of making wild guesses here. You keep watch, I'll go. He'd already told Long Fei he was supposed to be a guard, but Gu Qishao had never listened to him properly. You've been up Celestial Mountain before? Long Fei Yi asked unhappily. Gu had no retort, but reluctantly replied, Go ahead. I'll keep watch. Actually, Gu wasn't as smart as Han Yunxi, because Han Yunxi wanted to go as well, but she didn't say a word. Late at night, Long Fei Yi left. Han Yunxi tried to sneak after him. Gu quickly stopped her. Poison lass, it's dangerous. Han Yunxi looked back and gave him a pitiful, pleading look. Gu's heart immediately melted. Poison lass, hurry and chase after him. Otherwise, it'll be even more dangerous if you can't catch up. In this way, Han Yunxi quickly caught up with Long Fei Yi. Since she was already here, how could Long Fei Yi chase her away? Moreover, Han Yunxi was no longer a burden, but a capable assistant. There were a total of 5 mountains in the Tianshan mountain range. From the south to the north it was like a staircase. One mountain was next to another, and each was higher than the last. The 5th mountain in the north was the Tianshan Mountain, and its peak was the peak of the Tianshan Mountain. Because of the terrain, there was only one way to reach the top of Sky Mountain. This road ran from south to north through the entire Tianshan mountain range. In short, to reach the top of Tianshan Mountain, one had to climb Mount Wuchong. The cave that Han Yunxi and the others were hiding in was on the shady side of the first mountain. At this moment, they had taken a detour to the front of the mountain. The only way to find out about the situation on the mountain was up there. Just like the first time they came here, Long Fei Yi hugged Han Yunxi's waist tightly and protected her in his arms. Perhaps Long Fei Yi was too familiar with this place, so he easily reached the first mountain with Han Yunxi under his protection. No one noticed them. However, along the way he sensed that there were ambushes around them. Han Yunxi was puzzled. There were so many Tianshan Kenzo disciples. How did the Evil Sword School manage to control them? In terms of numbers, the evil sword school disciples were far inferior to the Tianshan disciples. Even if the 3 elders of the Sutra Pavilion, Hidden Sword Pavilion, and Lockhart Yard betrayed them, it was a matter of Tianshan Mountain. From the 1st to the 4th mountain, there were many branches of Tianshan Kenzo. These branches had a large number of disciples, and they did not belong to any pavilion or yard. How did the evil sword school manage to control them? How did they stop the news from spreading? Just as Han Yunxi was puzzled, the detoxification system gave her an answer. When Long Fei Yi brought her near the Meteor Sword Pavilion, the detoxification system issued a warning to Han Yunxi that there were many poison disciples in the pavilion. Poison attack. Han Yunxi muttered to herself. What's going on? Long Fei Yi asked. Han Yunxi smiled. If you didn't bring me here tonight, we would have to go there again. Haha. When did the evil sword school become the 100 Poisons sect? Long Fei Yi immediately understood what was going on. If it wasn't for the use of poison, how could Bai Yanqing guarantee that he could control Tianshan Mountain in such a short time and seal off all news? Let's go in and take a look. It's too far away. I can't find out what kind of poison they've been poisoned with, Han Yunxi whispered. The Meteor Sword Pavilion was the largest sword pavilion in Tianshan Mountain's first peak. In recent years, it had produced many outstanding disciples. The reason why Long Fei Yi chose the sword pavilion was because the pavilion master, Yin Yang, had a good relationship with Granny Yu from the commandment courtyard at the peak of Tianshan Mountain. They were like sisters. Most of the outstanding disciples in the Meteor Sword Pavilion had been promoted by Granny Yu. Very few of them entered the Hidden Sword Pavilion or the Scripture Pavilion, much less Lockhart Courtyard. Others might not tell the truth, but Yin Yang and Granny Yu were the same. They would definitely tell the truth and not betray Kenzo. Before she even entered, the detoxification system gave Han Yunxi an answer. Long Fei Yi, it's the traceless poison. Han Yunxi said seriously. This poison can only be put in water. It will linger for a day before it activates. Once it activates, the victim will fall unconscious. If the poison isn't cured within 7 months, the victim will fall unconscious and die. Poisoning the water source was the most energy-efficient method. Even if they didn't drink water, they would still have to eat. In short, they couldn't live without someone. No wonder everyone was poisoned at the same time. Bai Yanqing wants to destroy Kenzo? Long Fei Yi was alarmed. It had been 6 months since the 10th month of last year. In other words, if they had arrived a month later, all of the branches beneath Celestial Mountain would have been destroyed. No wonder the 2 depositories and 1 courtyard at the peak were working with the evil sword school. Back when Zhang Qiuzi was still the head of Lockhart Courtyard, the scripture and sword pavilions had long conspired with him to form their own factions. Bai Yanqing's actions were exactly what they wanted. When Zhang Qiuzi and Duan Muyao had colluded, Long Fei Yi had severely injured him and locked him up in the dungeons. No one had ever been convicted, because once Zhang Qiuzi was convicted, Kenzo would have to investigate Han Yunxi's identity as a descendant of the poison sect. For the sake of protecting Han Yunxi, he'd had to endure Medical City's pressure to delay the trial. Back then, Kenzo had released news that the trial would be delayed until Long Fei Yi inherited the position of sect head. Only then would Zhang Qiuzi, Duan Muyao, and the rest be tried. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi had left the mountain and delayed the trial until now. But after Zhang Qiuzi was imprisoned, Kenzo hadn't promoted anyone from Lockhart Courtyard to the position of head. Instead, he'd let Zhang Qiuzi's disciples fight amongst themselves. Now it looked like there was no internal strife in Lockhart Courtyard. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had always assumed that Bai Yanqing would hide in the Poison Sect or Northern Li. They never expected Bai Yanqing to target Celestial Mountain instead. But they didn't understand why Bai Yanqing wanted the martial arts circles. Had he forced the 3 honored elders to subdue Ganjiang for the sake of evil sword school, or had other motives? Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi grew more and more puzzled. They snuck into Meteor Sword Depository and soon discovered that there were only 3 or 4 evil sword school disciples standing guard inside. Inside the Great Hall, more than 30 disciples were lying unconscious on the ground. Such weak defenses made it easy for Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi to sneak inside. For the sake of not alerting the enemy too early, they didn't kill any of the guards. The two of them landed on one of the beams of the Great Hall and looked down at the floor full of unconscious people. Is Bai Yanqing so sure that we won't go to Celestial Mountain? Han Yunqi asked doubtfully. He has control of all the secret missives, so it'll be easy for him to guard against us, Long Fei Yi remarked. If Chu Shifeng hadn't stolen the missives, Bai Yanqing would have known they were going to Celestial Mountain half a month ago. Half a month was more than enough time for Bai Yanqing to set up an inescapable net. Thanks to Chu Shifeng's first-class merit, Han Yunqi grinned. She found a good vantage point and activated her detox system to do a thorough inspection. Even though she had already found out that he was poisoned when she was outside the hall, but for the sake of caution, she still kept an eye on him and checked him carefully. Be good and stay here. I'll go find Madame Yin, Long Fei Yi murmured. This time, Han Yunqi was obedient. She'd just finished her inspection and confirmed that there was only one type of poison in the Great Hall when Long Fei Yi returned. Madame Yin's in the back courtyard. There's someone watching over her. Long Fei Yi murmured back. Let's go take a look first. Han Yunqi's eyes flashed with shrewd light as she came up with a plan. By the time Long Fei Yi led Han Yunqi to Madame Yin, they couldn't get very close, but they could see her lying unconscious on a bamboo bed from a distance. There were 3 guards standing guard outside the door, including one from Lockhart Courtyard. Can you find out what kind of poison she's been poisoned with? Long Fei Yi asked. Han Yunqi immediately gave him an answer. It's a never-ending poison. It's similar to traceless poison. Once poisoned, she'll lose consciousness. But the toxicity is much stronger. Someone must have poisoned her. You have an antidote? Long Fei Yi asked. Long Fei Yi shook his head. It's not the right time yet. Han Yunqi smiled. Then when is the right time? Call the poison guards over and join forces with Gu Beiyue to save her. When the time comes, we'll go straight to the top of the mountain, Long Fei Yi said seriously. Han Yunqi looked at Long Fei Yi and smiled foolishly. She was just about to do that. Since Bai Yanqing's defense at the foot of the mountain was so weak, there was no need for them to waste time here. It didn't matter if Bai Yanqing was at the top of Sky Mountain or not. They could just attack directly. If Bai Yanqing was here, then they'd fight to their heart's content. If Bai Yanqing wasn't here, then it'd be even better. The two of them had the same idea, so there was no need for further discussion. Han Yunqi smiled as she patted her medical bag. Don't worry. There's an antidote any time. With Han Yunqi's words, Long Fei Yi was of course completely relieved. After understanding the situation at Meteor Sword Court, Long Fei Yi brought Han Yunqi to Heavenly Sea Court and the other sword courts. They spent the whole night walking through more than 30 sword courts in the first and second mountains. They found that all the sword courts were in the same situation as Meteor Sword Court. Whether it was the court master or the disciples, they were all unconscious due to poison. The poison in the court master and the disciple was different. If it were any other poison master, they would definitely go crazy if they had to check 6 different poisons in one night and make an antidote. However, this was a piece of cake for Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi didn't even need to remember it. The detoxification system automatically recorded it for her. The third and fourth mountains weren't easy to walk through. In order not to alert the enemy, they were very cautious. It took them 4 nights to walk through all the sword courts in the third and fourth mountains. As Han Yunqi predicted, the conditions on the third and fourth mountains were the same as the first and second mountains. Just like that, Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi spent 5 nights exploring half of Celestial Mountain and preparing their antidotes. Next, they waited for Gu Beiyue and the poison guards to arrive. Chu Shifeng was seriously injured and couldn't cultivate, so he could only rest and recuperate. Meanwhile, Han Yunqi used this time to calm down and cultivate her poison storage space. They assumed that Gu Beiyue would take at least 10 days to arrive. But who knew? Chapter 1058. Gu Beiyue's speed exceeded everyone's expectations. Less than 7 days after the letter was sent, he appeared before Han Yunqi and the rest. His white robes were still spotless, but his hair was disheveled and his face showed signs of fatigue. Even someone as calm as Long Fei Yi was stunned by Gu Beiyue's appearance. "How did you get here?" he asked. Gu Beiyue hadn't ridden a horse, but used lightness techniques to get here. He asked anxiously, "Where's Guard Chu? What's his condition now?" Only now did everyone realize why Gu Beiyue was in such a hurry. He was worried that Chu Shifeng's injuries would worsen. Chu Shifeng was lying on one side, blocked by everyone else. As soon as he heard Gu Beiyue's words, his heart clenched and he turned his head away. When had he ever hated or resented Gu Beiyue in the past? Han Yunqi and the rest hurried out of the way. As soon as Gu Beiyue saw Chu Shifeng, he strode over and crouched down on one side. Even though Chu Shifeng was staring at the wall, his first words were, "Guard Chu, I understand your situation now. Don't worry, I'll definitely treat you no matter what." Chu Shifeng looked back at him, at a loss for words. Gu Beiyue had already taken his hand and taken his pulse. Han Yunqi quickly explained the situation to Gu Beiyue, while Bailey Mingxiang and Su Donglin, who'd been taking care of Chu Shifeng, filled in the details. Han Yunqi stood on one side, looking at Gu Beiyue in silence. She couldn't help but think of a saying. "Like a person, like a rainbow, you'll know when you meet the top." How could there be someone like Gu Beiyue? He was always so warm and friendly to the people by his side. Sometimes, she really wanted to see Gu Beiyue lose his temper. After taking Chu Shifeng's pulse, Gu Beiyue carefully examined him and determined that both his legs were crippled. His left hand was fractured in 2 places and his internal organs were damaged. Fortunately, he'd taken the dragon pill. His true qi from practicing martial arts was slowly recovering to protect his body. Otherwise, Chu Shifeng would be beyond saving by the time he got here. Gu Beiyue hastily took out the medicine he'd prepared beforehand and reapplied medicine to the wounds Han Yunqi and Bailey Mingxiang had helped Chu Shifeng. She wrote a few more prescriptions and instructed Su Donglin. He must start taking the medicine within 7 days. 3 prescriptions a day. Combine it with acupuncture. "Dr. Gu, I'm fine. Just prescribe me some medicine and I'll be fine. Don't delay His Highness's important matters," Chu Shifeng said hastily. If he wanted to use acupuncture, he would have to delay Gu Beiyue's time. His Highness and the princess were still waiting for him to ascend Celestial Mountain. Gu Beiyue looked towards Bailey Mingxiang. "Miss Mingxiang, do you remember the acupuncture techniques I taught you before you ascended Celestial Mountain?" Bailey Mingxiang gave a start before nodding. "I've always remembered." "Dr. Gu, don't worry. Mingxiang will take good care of Guard Chu." "Princess, since news of our dual cultivation has been leaked, Miss Mingxiang doesn't need to risk her life with us up the mountain. Why don't we have her take care of Guard Chu?" Gu Beiyue asked. "Besides you and her, I won't be at ease with anyone else taking care of him," Han Yunqi said. "This isn't a place to stay for long. Let's send them off first, then discuss our plans for ascending the mountain." Gu Beiyue looked towards Long Fei Yi. In the end, Long Fei Yi had to make the final decision. Long Fei Yi had no objections. "Su Donglin, find a few people to escort them to Crescent Moon Manor. Keep a close eye on Chu Tianyin and wait for further orders." Crescent Moon Manor wasn't far from Western Zhou's imperial capital. It was one of Long Fei Ye's other mansions in the Western Zhou desert. There were a few small springs in the manor. Spring water gushed out all year round, nourishing a large patch of greenery. When Long Fei Yi bought the manor, it was the beginning of the month. When the crescent moon shone on the spring water, he changed the name of the manor to Crescent Moon. Chu Tianyin still hadn't found out why Western Zhou's Emperor Kangxing had been in the limelight during the 100 Poisons sect incident. There was also no news of Mu Qinggu. Long Fei Yi was naturally dissatisfied with this. If he hadn't been so busy recently, he would have gone to see Chu Tianyin in person. "Yes, your subordinate understands." Su Donglin was very happy. This way he could take care of Boss Chu. Such an arrangement seemed to be very appropriate. Gu, who had been silent all this time, was looking at the prescription. No matter how he looked at it, he found it strange. This prescription didn't require acupuncture. Gu Beiyue was clearly lying. Gu's eyes darted around, but he didn't expose Chu Tianyin on the spot. "Your Highness, Princess, Take care. Bailey Mingxiang bowed respectfully. At this moment, her feelings were complicated. She felt a sense of relief, but she couldn't bear to part with them. Long Fei Yi ignored her. He lowered his head and whispered something into Gu Beiyue's ear, but she didn't know what to say. Han Yunqi smiled. You guys be careful too. After Bailey Mingxiang and the others left, Gu pulled Gu Beiyue over and whispered, "There's something wrong with your prescription and acupuncture, right? There shouldn't be, right?" Gu Beiyue smiled. "Definitely. That prescription doesn't need acupuncture." "I'm sure of it," Gu said. "Seventh young master, let's talk about this after we save Mu Linger. We have important matters to discuss now." Gu Beiyue didn't argue and cleverly stalled for time. Given Gu's personality, he would have forgotten about it if it wasn't for Poison Lass. Gu Beiyue had done it on purpose. His goal was obviously to send Bailey Mingxiang away. Bailey Mingxiang couldn't see through him, but he could see through Bailey Mingxiang. No one knew what Su Xiaoyu had done in the Duke of Qin's residence, but it couldn't escape his eyes. Today he had personally sent Bailey Mingxiang away. He knew that he would have to leave one day. Gu Beiyue turned around and said seriously, "Your Highness Princess, in this one's opinion, there's no need to wait for the poison guards. Let's take action tonight." Seeing Han Yunqi and Long Fei Ye's surprise, he calmly added, "This one hasn't had a chance to use my shadow arts properly since I recovered. I hope that your Highness and Princess will give this one a chance. If you hand over all the sword garrets on 4th Mountain to this one will definitely not disappoint you." Long Fei Yi liked people who were straightforward the most, and this kind of person was exactly what he lacked. He was in a good mood and said with a smile, "If your princess is willing to give you all the antidotes, this crown prince naturally has no objections." Han Yunqi couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't easy for Long Fei Yi to say the words, "Your princess." She readily handed over a large bag of antidotes. There are a total of 55 sword garrets, and each of the garrets is poisoned with a different poison. There are about 30 disciples in each garret, and the poisons are all the same. I've made all the antidotes into pills and marked them clearly. Han Yunqi handed over the antidotes and added, "Gu Beiyue, you should consider this carefully. It won't be easy to complete all 55 garrets on 4th Mountain. After alerting the enemy, if you aren't fast enough, you will be in big trouble. Princess, please don't worry. After this subordinate completes this task, this subordinate will immediately meet you at the top of Heaven Mountain." Gu Beiyue cupped his fists and bowed. Unlike his usual calmness, his words were especially powerful this time. No matter how Gu looked at it, he felt that Long Fei Yi, Poison Lass, and Gu Beiyue were very harmonious and had a tacit understanding. He felt that he had to say something, otherwise he would be isolated. He quickly hooked his arm around Gu Beiyue's shoulder and said with a smile, "Brother, then we'll wait for you at the top of the mountain." But Gu Beiyue whispered beside him, "Seventh young master, if Bai Yanqing is at the top of the mountain, please protect the princess well." Gu was slightly taken aback. Only then did he realize that he might be the main character of this trip. He quickly came back to his senses and agreed readily, "Don't worry, I'm here." That night, Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi, Gu and Gu Beiyue worked together for the first time and sneaked into Heaven Mountain. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi were dressed in purple and looked extraordinarily noble. Gu was dressed in red robes and looked as coquettish as fire. Gu Beiyue was dressed in white and looked as elegant as an immortal. In the misty mountain forest, the 4 figures chased after each other at high speed. They flew soundlessly like a dream and a fantasy, calling themselves a scene. After ascending the first mountain, Gu Beiyue landed lightly on the mountain. Han Yunqi and the rest turned back to look, but Gu Beiyue waved with a smile, indicating that they didn't need to stay any longer. After Han Yunqi and the other 2 figures disappeared into the night, Gu Beiyue looked up at the moon, as if trying to determine the time. At this moment, the gentleness and indifference on his face had disappeared. His eyes were as cold as ice, and when such a clean face became serious, it actually caused one's heart to tremble. His entire being was so cold that he was like an azura that had no temperature and no emotions. He was so cold that he was extremely sharp. He slowly turned around and looked at Meteor Sword Pavilion. In an instant, he disappeared into thin air. Previously, Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi didn't need to climb to the top of the mountain to scout. They only needed to circle around the mountain forest, so they didn't encounter the guards at the mountain passage. This time, they were heading directly to the top of Heaven Mountain and would naturally encounter the guards. Between the first and second mountains was a bamboo bridge, between the second and third mountains were stone swords, and between the third and fourth mountains were stone swords. When Han Yunqi went up Heaven Mountain for the first time, she encountered difficulties at the bamboo bridge. Long Fei Yi and the disciples of Sword Pavilion at the foot of the mountain helped her cross the bridge. Han Yunqi had a very deep impression of them. This time, there were no obstructions to ask them to follow the rules of Heaven Mountain, only the guards. They didn't avoid the path they had to pass, but killed them. Facing Kenzo's defense, not to mention Long Fei Yi, even Gu could deal with it. But it was Han Yunqi who'd killed them without a sound or trace. She used poison needles. Just like Long Fei Yi's sword that slit the throat, she could kill with a single needle. Soon, they arrived at the fourth and fifth mountains, which were the top of Heaven Mountain. They were connected by a chain bridge. To reach the peak, they had to cross the bridge. But unlike the guards at the foot of the mountain, there were 2 rows of guards at the end of the bridge. One row was made up of swordsmen from Evil Sword School, while the other was made up of disciples from Lockhart Courtyard. Long Fei Yi recognized the Lockhart Courtyard disciples at a glance. They were all sword experts personally taught by Zhang Qiuzi. A few other people were sitting in a pavilion on the side of the bridge. Han Yunqi's eyes were sharp enough to spot a familiar face. She smiled and said, "Long Fei Yi, your future sister-in-law is there too." That's right. The person Han Yunqi recognized was Zhang Qiuzi's daughter, the eldest young miss of Lockhart Courtyard, Zhang Qiuying. Chapter 1059. After all these years, Zhang Qiuying still looked as dainty and beautiful as ever. She didn't seem bothered by her father's affairs or the changes in Lockhart Courtyard. If Han Yunqi guessed right, Zhang Qiuying had played a huge part in keeping Lockhart Courtyard from falling into chaos after Zhang Qiuzi's imprisonment. Women were born leaders. Once they led men, they could lead the world as well. "Long Fei Yi, are we going to kill our way over? Or?" Gu muttered. Their previous defenses had been weak and few people, so they were able to sneak up without alerting anyone. But things were different here. Once they made a move, the entire mountain would be alerted. But before Long Fei Yi could answer, Han Yunqi strode out. She had been filled with anticipation the first time she'd climbed Celestial Mountain, only to run into Zhang Qiuying on the first peak. That woman not only blocked her way, but even tattled on her to Granny Yu. Because of that, Zhang Qiuying had run into trouble before she even reached the peak and met with old Kenzo. She hadn't gotten rid of Zhang Qiuzi last time, but she hadn't gotten her revenge on Zhang Qiuying yet. Han Yunqi wasn't here for revenge this time, but she was more than happy to do it while she was at it. Moreover, they had no other way to reach the peak besides killing their way out. As soon as Han Yunqi stepped out, Long Fei Yi followed closely behind, followed by Gu. "Who's there?" Zhang Qiuying and the rest looked over, only to freeze at the sight of Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi. How did they climb Celestial Mountain? How did they manage to reach this place without alerting the people below? Didn't the head of Evil Sword School promise her before he left that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi wouldn't come to Celestial Mountain in the first 6 months of spring? In half a year, the poison left behind by the Evil Sword School's master was enough to force the 3 venerables to subdue the ancient sword, Ganjiang. Zhang Qiuying didn't know why the Evil Sword School master was so certain of Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi's whereabouts. However, the Evil Sword School master was able to deal with 3 venerables, so she naturally trusted him. Zhang Qiuying wasn't stupid. She immediately whispered to the people beside her. "Quickly send a message to the sect master. Tell him that Long Fei Yi and the others are here. Also, I'll stall for time here. Hurry up to the top of the mountain and tell Gong Beichen." Gong Beichen was none other than the eldest disciple of the Evil Sword School's headmaster. His talent was extraordinary, and his swordsmanship was exquisite. Compared to He Ilian, he was even better. Almost everyone in Evil Sword School believed that Gong Beichen would definitely inherit the position of Evil Sword School's sect leader in less than 10 years. Other than sect leader by Shanqing, Gong Beichen would be the youngest sect leader in the history of Evil Sword School. As soon as Song Qiuying walked out of the pavilion, the two guards immediately left from behind her. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi, long time no see. What wind blew in Heaven Mountain today that brought you here? Although Song Qiuying was flustered, she forced a smile. She didn't dare to look at Long Fei Yi. Her gaze landed on Han Yunqi. Her father had lost all his martial arts and was locked up in a prison cell. He died from his serious injuries. All of this was caused by Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi, especially Han Yunqi. If this woman hadn't appeared, her father wouldn't have forced Long Fei Yi so close, and the tragedy of the ranking tournament wouldn't have happened. At this moment, although she was smiling at Han Yunqi, she already treated Han Yunqi as her father's murderer. The reason she colluded with Evil Sword School was to fulfill her father's dying wish to lead Lockhart Courtyard to independence. Secondly, she wanted to borrow the power of Evil Sword School to avenge her father. She hadn't obtained the treasured sword Ganjiang yet. No matter what, she had to stop Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi to buy more time for Gong Beichen. Even if Evil Sword School's sect leader wasn't at the peak, Gong Beichen had the three supremacies and Li Kenshin as hostages. As long as he was prepared, he wouldn't be afraid of Long Fei Yi. Although Song Qiuying was fully prepared, when she saw Long Fei Yi's hand around Han Yunqi's waist, she couldn't help but feel heartache. If only her father didn't have any thoughts of betrayal. If only Duanmu Yao was imprisoned and her father didn't suffer along with her. How great would that be? If Duanmu Yao was crippled, then she'd have a chance. Although she'd settled for second best and followed heretical sword sect's Gong Beichen, her heart couldn't help but throb at the sight of Long Fei's divinity. This man was no longer Tianning's Duke of Qin, but East Qin's crown prince. West Wind. Han Yunqi replied coldly. Song Qiuying didn't understand Han Yunqi's meaning, but Long Fei Yi and Gu knew that Han Yunqi was referring to Chu Shifeng. If they didn't beat them to a pulp today, the first person they'd let down would be Chu Shifeng, who'd risked his life to come down the mountain. West Wind. Song Qiuying laughed out loud. Why didn't I sense it? Han Yunqi, you didn't come uninvited, did you? Han Yunqi only smiled coldly without a word. Song Qiuying was trying to think of a way to stall for time when Han Yunqi didn't speak. She was happy to do the same. After a while, Han Yunqi really didn't say a word. Long Fei Yi and Gu didn't speak either. But gradually, Song Qiuying began to feel guilty. Just what does Han Yunqi mean by this? What does she want to do by wasting time like this? Have they already reached the peak of Celestial Mountain? Song Qiuying couldn't figure it out no matter how much she thought about it. The more she thought about it, the more flustered she felt. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, Han Yunqi, just what do you want? Han Yunqi arched a brow at her before smiling disdainfully. She didn't answer. When Han Yunqi was arrogant, she was overbearing and domineering. Perhaps only Long Fei Yi could suppress her domineering aura. Under her disdain, Song Qiuying felt more and more guilty. She felt a sense of inferiority. No, Song Qiuying was shocked. How could she have such a feeling? Shame could turn into anger, and guilt could turn into anger. She questioned loudly, Han Yunqi, just what do you want? Eldest young Mist Song, my husband and I are returning to our sect. What right do you have to question me? We're happy to stand here. What does it have to do with you? Song Qiuying always felt that she had a sharp tongue and was eloquent. But when she met Han Yunqi, she couldn't even win a round. Song Qiuying stared at Han Yunqi's white teeth and thin lips. She secretly thought that if Han Yunqi fell into her hands one day, she would cut off Han Yunqi's tongue first. Song Qiuying snorted disdainfully. Then just you wait. There was only one path to the peak of Celestial Mountain. Let them waste their time. Song Qiuying comforted herself. However, Han Yunqi wasn't done speaking. She chuckled and said, as for why Gu came to Celestial Mountain, why don't you ask him? Only then did Song Qiuying realize that the handsome man in red standing behind them was the rumored medical city's Shao Qi, Gu. Gu didn't put Song Choying in his eyes at all. When Han Yunqi said this, he looked at Song Choying seriously and said lazily, "You want to talk to this young master with this kind of trash? You!" Song Choying was furious. At this time, the 2 Lockhart Yard disciples she sent away came back. They were 2 handsome young men, but when they came back, their faces were full of wrinkles. It was as if they had aged a few decades in an instant, turning into old men. "Eldest young miss, save us. Eldest young miss. Eldest young miss, are we poisoned? Save us." The 2 ran in front of Song Choying in horror and begged with their faces covered. The contrast between his soft and tender hands and his wrinkled face made Song Choying and the other's hair stand on end. Song Choying had seen such aged faces from Duanmuyao before. This aging overnight. Song Choying looked at Han Yunqi in disbelief. She finally realized what Han Yunqi was waiting for. She was waiting for the poison to take effect. When did she poison them? She was so far away. How could she poison them without them noticing? Song Choying had secretly made plans. If she couldn't hold off Han Yunqi, she would provoke Han Yunqi into a duel. Han Yunqi was trash. No matter how good her martial arts were, she couldn't get close to her, so she couldn't poison her. However, Han Yunqi was clearly using these 2 disciples to warn her. When did this woman learn martial arts? Song Choying began to feel afraid. She couldn't help holding her cheeks. Seeing the faces of the 2 disciples in front of her made her want to vomit. She didn't dare to imagine if her face became like this. Would she go crazy? No. She had no choice but to retreat. Her face was filled with fear. "Protect eldest young miss." The one who spoke was Song Choying's 2nd senior brother. He pulled out his sword and stepped forward. But the moment he stepped forward, his face immediately hurt. He touched it and felt several wrinkles. "My face?" He was shocked and looked at the people around him. Everyone around him was shocked. They could clearly see that the wrinkles on his face were slowly increasing, and his face was slowly becoming wrinkled. He was also poisoned. Heavens, how did Han Yunqi poison him? Han Yunqi was holding the poison needle that Long Fei Yi had ordered for her. She walked step by step towards Song Choying. Song Choying's senior brothers originally wanted to protect her, but when they saw what happened to their 2nd senior brother, they suddenly stopped. As Han Yunqi approached, they all retreated and avoided her. Song Choying turned to escape. She no longer cared about Heaven's Peak. Her face was more important than anything. Unfortunately, Gu Qishao soon landed in front of her to block her way. Song Choying immediately fled to the right, but Gu Qishao blocked her again. She fled to the left, but Gu Qishao blocked her again. As for Long Fei Yi, he watched from the side, letting the surrounding disciples escape and sneak attack Han Yunqi. He had always disdained to make a move on women. Finally, Han Yunqi stopped in front of Song Choying. She was holding a poison needle and playing with it with interest. Song Choying fell to the ground in fright. Han Yunqi was helpless. Boring. Was she too strong or was her opponent too weak? Just as Han Yunqi was about to squat down and question Song Choying about Heaven's Peak, Song Choying hurriedly said, "Han Yunqi, back then you didn't know martial arts. It was Long Fei Yi who helped you up Heaven's Peak. Now that you know martial arts, why don't we have a competition today? Let's see who crosses the suspension bridge first. If you win, I'll take your needle. If you lose, I'll never go up Heaven's Peak again. Do you dare?" Han Yunqi laughed out loud. "That's so pointless. Why don't we?" Chapter 1060. What did Han Yunqi want to do? Song Choying waited in trepidation. No matter what, as long as Han Yunqi agreed to compete with her, she still had a chance. Who knew that Han Yunqi would say, "How about this? Take a needle from me. If you can cross the bridge before the poison takes effect, I'll help you detoxify. If you can't cross the bridge, then I'm sorry." Song Choying was shocked and angry. "Why?" "Because..." Han Yunqi shrugged and stepped back. She smiled and pointed at Song Choying's abdomen. "Because you're already poisoned. Eldest young Mist Song, you don't have much time left. Song Qiuying was horrified and hurriedly looked down at her abdomen. She really saw an extremely small poison needle in her abdomen. One night's twilight, Han Yunqi kindly reminded. No! Song Qiuying's beautiful face turned pale. She didn't have time to argue and immediately flew toward the iron chain bridge leading to Mount Wuchong. Han Yunqi looked back at Long Fei Yi. Seeing that Long Fei Yi had no intention of stopping her, she flew after Song Qiuying. Seeing this, the dozen or so Lockhart Courtyard disciples all rushed to block Han Yunqi's way. The heretical sword sect disciples at the end of the bridge lined up in a row to block Han Yunqi's path. One of the disciples turned back and shouted at Song Qiuying, "Eldest young Mist Song, run, go tell young Master Gong," who knew that as soon as his voice fell, he suddenly fell to the ground powerlessly. As soon as he fell to the ground, his eyes closed and he lost consciousness. Everyone was shocked. They had all seen the poisoned disciples at the foot of the mountain and could immediately tell that this disciple was poisoned. But how did he get poisoned? Han Yunqi was clearly so far away. And how did the two disciples who were poisoned by one night's twilight just now get poisoned? Even if Han Yunqi knew martial arts, she shouldn't be so strong, right? Song Qiuying's martial arts weren't bad. In a short while, she had already flown across half of the iron chain bridge. Everyone was extremely nervous. Whether Song Qiuying could detoxify the poison or not was not important to them. Whether Song Qiuying could successfully reach the top of the mountain was the key. Han Yunqi's cold gaze swept across the crowd. Suddenly, she leaped into the air, both of her hands holding poison needles. The poison needle technique she'd used just then was called Shadowless. It was one of the most difficult and powerful of all of Long Fei's personal needle techniques. The techniques and moves were developed by Chang Fei Yi, while the needles were specially made by Tang Li. The shadowless needles were silent and formless. Usually, the enemy would not even realize that they were hit by the needles. Han Yunqi had only tried one needle at a time. She had never tried multiple needles at once. Today, there was a chance for her to join forces. She didn't mind giving it a try. She hovered in midair, silently counting the number of people in her heart, silently anchoring her target. Before she could make a move, several disciples from Lockhart Academy rushed over with swords. Han Yunqi immediately retreated. Seeing this, the disciples thought that she was afraid and were overjoyed. The people behind her also attacked together. Han Yunqi narrowed her cold eyes and continued to retreat. Seeing that the disciples from Lockhart Academy had the absolute upper hand, the disciples from Evil Sword School immediately flew over and guarded the right side against Long Fei Yi and Gu. One of the disciples whispered, "Quick! Kidnap her!" They knew very well that they couldn't beat Long Fei Yi. However, if Han Yunqi wanted to die, they would fulfill her wish. As long as they could kidnap Han Yunqi, it would be equivalent to controlling Long Fei Yi. Song Qiuying was running for her life, while Han Yunqi was surrounded by a dozen or so sword-wielding disciples. Meanwhile, Long Fei and Gu Qishao were being guarded against by a dozen heretical sword sect disciples. This made Gu Qishao very unhappy. He suddenly shouted, "Poison lass! What are you dawdling for? Do you need help?" Han Yunqi glanced at him and smiled without saying anything. She continued to retreat. "Get into formation and kill," a disciple shouted. In an instant, 10 disciples spread out with their swords. The sword chi was sharp and the sword light was bright. It formed a sword chi circle that surrounded Han Yunqi. The disciples by Song Qiuying's side naturally wouldn't be weak. Feeling the sword chi behind her, Song Qiuying looked back and immediately felt relieved. She looked worriedly at Long Fei Yi and Gu, afraid that the two men would chase after her. Who knew that Long Fei Yi and Gu seemed to have forgotten about her and didn't even look at her. Long Fei Yi's cold face was particularly serious. His gaze didn't leave Han Yunqi for a moment. Gu stroked his chin with a playful expression. He also stared at Han Yunqi. She was clearly running away, but at this moment, Song Qiuying suddenly hoped that Long Fei Yi or Gu would look back at her. She even hoped that they would chase after her and stop her. Even she herself was shocked by this thought. Coming back to her senses, she borrowed the strength of the iron chain bridge and continued to run forward. Song Qiuying never thought that there would be a day when she couldn't obtain Long Fei Ye's love, and even his hostility. Just how pitiful was she? The sword qi around Han Yunqi became more and more intense. More than 10 disciples formed a circle. It was unknown who gave the order, but all of them raised their swords and slashed down at Han Yunqi, who was trapped in the middle. Han Yunqi had nowhere to run. The sword qi and sword qi were so intense that the disciples of Evil Sword School looked back again. Song Qiuying couldn't help but look back again. This was the most powerful sword formation in Lockhart Courtyard. With 13 swords attacking together, Han Yunqi would definitely die. However, they didn't see the blood splatter as they expected. What they saw was that the 30 swords stopped 3 inches away from Han Yunqi's body. All the sword qi and sword qi dissipated. Suddenly, the 30 disciples of Lockhart Courtyard all fell to the ground and fainted. They were all hit by an extremely thin poison needle in their heads. For a moment, everyone was stunned. At such a close distance, didn't the disciples of Lockhart Courtyard know to dodge when Han Yunqi used her needles? With their abilities, they should be able to dodge. How could this be? Damn it! The disciples of Evil Sword School turned around and attacked. This time, Han Yunqi didn't use the invisible needles. She clenched her fists and waved fiercely. In an instant, several needles flew out and flew towards the disciples of Evil Sword School. The speed of the needles wasn't slow and could be seen with the naked eye. The disciples of Evil Sword School raised their swords to block. The disciple closest to Han Yunqi used his sword to block the poison needle accurately. But who knew that although the poison needle looked ordinary, its strength was astonishing. Clang! After the collision, the poison needle actually pierced through the sword blade and went straight for the person behind the sword. The person was stabbed in the eye by the poison needle. He cried out in pain and fell down. When the surrounding people saw this, they didn't dare to block the needles and dodged in all directions. There were a few people who couldn't dodge in time and ended up in a similar situation. They all fell unconscious. Han Yunqi was no longer smiling. Her phoenix eyes were cold and stern, making people not dare to look at her directly. She was in midair with one hand behind her back and the other hand raised fiercely. In an instant, several poison needles shot out. Unlike the previous round, the poison needles were very fast this time. They were like a dream or an illusion. Everyone only saw a shadow pass by, and by the time they recovered, the poison needles were already in front of them. It was too late to dodge. Just like that, more than 10 disciples of Evil Sword School were poisoned by the needles one after another. Some screamed in shock, some cried out in pain. Some didn't even have time to recover before they fell from the sky and fell unconscious. Song Qiuying turned around at some point. She was so shocked that she forgot to run. She had watched for so long and only saw Han Yunqi raise her hand twice to deal with more than 20 sword experts. Not to mention her sinister and precise needle techniques. Just her internal energy alone was frightening. Without the support of powerful inner strength, she wouldn't be able to use that kind of power, let alone that kind of speed. Song Qiuying thought of a saying. A true expert would never use more than 3 moves. Wasn't this talking about Han Yunqi? Han Yunqi landed gracefully and used the ground as a stepping stone. She then soared into the air and flew towards Song Qiuying. Her body was as light as a swallow as she flew over. Her purple robes fluttered, and she was as beautiful as a fairy that had fallen into the mortal world. Poison Lass is so beautiful, Gu couldn't help sighing. Long Fei Ye's lips curled into a satisfied smile. His line of sight followed her silently without disturbing her. This should be the first time Han Yunqi fought alone after learning martial arts. She didn't look like a newbie at all. Her 2 moves and a few needles were completed beautifully. Seeing Han Yunqi chasing after her, Song Qiuying regained her senses. She broke out in cold sweat and hurried forward. Han Yunqi reached down and grabbed at the air, immediately picking up the sword from the ground. She landed steadily on the iron chain of the iron bridge and slashed elegantly with her sword. She soared into the air and the bridge broke. Song Qiuying didn't step on the bridge, and this sword didn't seem to have much effect on her. But just as the iron chain bridge fell into the abyss, Han Yunqi held the sword with both hands and suddenly slashed forward. Han Yunqi, you can't do this. You're going back on your words. Song Qiuying was alarmed, thinking that Han Yunqi was going to attack her directly. But she was wrong. Han Yunqi's sword was like a rainbow, its sword chi capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas as it struck the falling iron chain bridge. The wooden planks on the iron chain bridge were suddenly lifted up by the powerful sword chi and flew up, smashing towards Song Qiuying. Song Qiuying finally saw Han Yunqi's intention, and in a moment of desperation, she finally realized that she could resist. She didn't escape but drew her sword and slashed at the wooden planks flying over. Han Yunqi's lips curled into a sneer as she flew from the side and soon landed on the opposite cliff. She watched Song Qiuying deal with the wooden planks. She had to admit that Song Qiuying's swordsmanship was worthy of admiration. But Han Yunqi still kindly reminded her, "Eldest young Mist Song, you don't have much time left." Song Qiuying was immediately distracted when a large wooden plank smashed towards her back, causing her to cry out in pain. She didn't care about being smashed and anxiously flew towards Han Yunqi. Just as she was about to approach, Han Yunqi took a step back and spread out her hands. Her palms were filled with poison needles. She smiled at the frightened Song Qiuying, and the power of the phoenix erupted from her palms. The poison needles flew in front of her and formed a poison needle barrier at the edge of the cliff. Song Qiuying stopped abruptly and didn't dare to approach. Chapter 1061. Time passed. Song Qiuying stood on the edge of the cliff, facing a wall of needles, not knowing what to do. Han Yunqi stood behind the wall with her arms crossed, calm and composed. Song Qiuying held her sword with one hand and caressed her face with the other, angrily saying, "Han Yunqi, what are you trying to do? It seems that eldest Mist Song doesn't want the antidote." Han Yunqi said helplessly. Song Qiuying angrily swung her sword at the wall of needles. But who would do that? There was a powerful force hidden between the needles. Song Qiuying's fierce sword actually couldn't disperse the needles. Han Yunqi stood motionless, silently counting in her heart. Based on the amount of poison used, the effects of the poison would be different in 1 night and 1 year. Song Qiuying didn't believe in heresy and swung her sword again, but her sword actually bounced back. Song Qiuying began to feel afraid and frantically slashed. Han Yunqi smiled. "Eldest Mist Song, how about this? Answer a few of my questions. If I'm satisfied, I'll give you the antidote. How about it?" Song Qiuying immediately stopped. "What questions? How's my martial arts?" Han Yunqi asked. "You're an expert. You're stronger than me," Song Qiuying said without hesitation. Han Yunqi shook her head. "That's flattery, not the truth. Your internal energy is very strong. Your needle technique is strange and varied, vicious and accurate. You can be considered an expert. Not many disciples of Sky Mountain are your match." Song Qiuying spoke the truth. However, Han Yunqi still shook her head. "It doesn't sound good." "You?" Song Qiuying racked her brains. Even when Duanmu Yao was here, she didn't flatter her like this. Thinking of Duanmu Yao, Song Qiuying hurriedly said, "Your martial arts are stronger than Duanmu Yao's. You'll definitely defeat her in 3 moves. Han Yunqi immediately narrowed her eyes. "Eldest Mist Song, you're comparing this princess to a trash?" Song Qiuying's internal energy was gone. This was an open secret. Song Qiuying realized she had said something wrong, but she really didn't know how to answer Han Yunqi to satisfy her. She kept touching her face and was so anxious that she was about to cry. Finally, she asked angrily, "Han Yunqi, what do you want me to say?" Han Yunqi just looked at her without saying a word. Gu Beiwei and Gu had already fallen to the side. They were very curious. What kind of answer would satisfy Han Yunqi? "Long Fei Yi, if it were you, how would you answer?" Gu whispered. Long Fei Yi ignored him. Gu snorted in disdain. "I knew that a poker face like you wouldn't know how to make a woman happy." Long Fei Yi was expressionless as he said, "No matter what this crown prince says, she will be happy." Gu pursed his lips and didn't speak to Long Fei Yi for a long time. At this time, Song Qiuying suddenly understood and said anxiously, Han Yunshi, it was all my fault that you went to Celestial Mountain last time. I shouldn't have bullied you because you don't know martial arts. I shouldn't have complained to Granny you. I was wrong, I was wrong. Please forgive me this time. Han Yunshi was waiting for these words. She smiled and took a step back. With a wave of her hand, all the poison needles gathered into a stream and slowly flowed into her hand. Gu was very surprised. He knew that Poison Lass's internal energy was very strong, but she was able to use it so freely in such a short time. Long Feiyi, how did he teach her? Song Qiuying happily stepped onto the cliff and immediately reached out to Han Yunshi for the antidote. Quick! Give me the antidote. You can't go back on your words. Who knew that Han Yunshi would say, I haven't finished asking my questions. Why are you in such a hurry? Song Qiuying couldn't bear it anymore and had to endure. Han Yunshi became serious. Where's Bai Yanqing? Bai Yanqing? Song Qiuying was confused. That immortal person. Han Yunshi was suspicious and said coldly, Where is he? I don't know that person and I've never seen him before. Song Qiuying wasn't lying. She still knew that Bai Yanqing was Evil Sword School's sect master. Seeing Song Qiuying's reaction, Han Yunshi knew what was going on. So Evil Sword School's people didn't know that their sect master was the head of the Immortal Phone Clan. Bai Yanqing. Why did Bai Yanqing hide his identity from Evil Sword School? Evil Sword School's sect master is at the top of Heaven Mountain? Han Yunshi asked again. Song Qiuying hesitated. Han Yunshi stared at her coldly and didn't rush her. In the end, Song Qiuying compromised. He left a long time ago. I don't know where he went. So Bai Yanqing wasn't there? Bai Yanqing was so careless in defending Heaven Mountain and didn't personally oversee it. Where did he get his confidence from? Could it be because he controlled the secret letters? Han Yunshi didn't have time to think about it. She looked at Long Feiyi and Gu and saw that they were relieved. Although they were prepared to fight with Bai Yanqing, they still had people to save and war to fight. If Bai Yanqing wasn't at the top of Heaven Mountain, they didn't mind destroying Evil Sword School after taking back Heaven Mountain. Then who is at the top of Heaven Mountain? Han Yunshi continued to ask. If Bai Yanqing wasn't guarding the top of Heaven Mountain, who could subdue the three supremacies? Could it be that Bai Yanqing poisoned the three supremacies? Does Bai Yanqing want to poison the entire Tianshan Kenzo? Song Qiuying stammered. It's second elder, third elder, and the disciples of Evil Sword School. This princess is very dissatisfied with your answer. Han Yunshi's eyes were sharp. She took out a bottle of antidote and handed it to Song Qiuying. This is the last question. What's the situation at the top of Heaven Mountain? Why do you need the sword Ganjiang? Song Qiuying instinctively reached out to grab the antidote, but Han Yunshi casually threw it down the cliff. Answer my question and then chase after them. If you answer quickly, you might be able to get it back. Otherwise, I can guarantee that even the sect master of Heretical Sword Sect who knows how to use poison wouldn't be able to cure you. Song Qiuying looked into the abyss, but she couldn't see the antidote anymore. The abyss was unimaginably deep. Since the founding of Tianshan Kenzo, no one had been able to reach the bottom. The longer this dragged on, the lower the antidote would fall. Even if she chased after them, she wouldn't be able to get back up. Han Yunshi wasn't that easy to fool. If she didn't explain everything clearly, it would drag on for a long time. But if she did, then everything would be over. Han Yunshi's lips quirked up into a cold smile as she waited patiently. Song Qiuying was defeated in the end. The people from Juchong Hall were poisoned. The three supremacies were also poisoned. The disciple of Evil Sword School's sect master, Gong Beichun, is personally guarding the top of Heaven Mountain. There are hidden swords and poisonous insects. I heard from Gong Beichun that Ganjiang is... At this point, Long Feiyi and Gu became alert. But who knew that just as Song Qiuying was about to continue speaking, several sharp arrows suddenly flew at them from behind. Be careful. Long Feiyi anxiously reminded Han Yunshi. Han Yunshi naturally knew. She pulled Song Qiuying and immediately flew away from the cliff to avoid the arrows. Long Feiyi and Gu also retreated to the side. Several arrows missed their target, and a man flew down from the clouds with several archers. The man was quite handsome and wore an enchanting red robe. His every movement was flirtatious. If Gu wasn't here, this man would be quite pleasing to the eye. But Gu was right beside him. The two of them were like the clouds in the sky and the mud on the ground. This red-robed man not only wore clothes similar to Gu Chishao's, but had a similar personality as well. The moment he came over, he didn't even look at the people on both sides. He directly pointed his sword at Han Yunqi. "Bitch, who are you? I order you to release eldest Mist Song immediately. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences." Han Yunqi could be considered experienced and knowledgeable, but she was frightened by the man's domineering tone. She even felt that it had been a long time since Long Fei spoke to her so domineeringly. Han Yunqi immediately looked at Long Fei Yi. Sure enough, Long Fei Yi's naturally cold face immediately turned cold. As for Gu, he seemed to be in a good mood. He was rubbing his chin and sizing up the man in red with interest. "Who is he?" Han Yunqi whispered. Song Qiuying was already in despair. "He's Gong Beichen." "Han Yunqi, I've told you everything I know. I beg you, let me go." "What's the hurry?" Han Yunqi whispered. It was obvious that this Gong Beichen didn't recognize the three of them. "Bear the consequences?" Han Yunqi laughed. "What do you mean? You're courting death." Gong Beichen was furious. He arrogantly raised his hand and several archers behind him scattered in all directions, their bows ready to shoot. Long Fei Yi and Gu clearly couldn't take it anymore. Just as they were about to come over, Han Yunqi raised her hand to signal them not to come over. The arrows weren't poisonous, but the poison in each arrow was the same. Playing with poison with her was simply courting death. This time, the man in red looked at Long Fei Yi and Gu and snorted. "No hurry. Wait until this young master takes care of this bitch. Then I'll take care of you." Heavens! Just how arrogant was this guy? Was he so arrogant that he didn't have a brain? Long Fei Yi and Gu were completely ignored for the first time. Han Yunqi thought that this guy would be very capable, but who knew that he only ordered his men to shoot? Han Yunqi grabbed Song Qiuying and evaded the arrows with a few dodges. At the same time, she collected the poison from the arrows into her poison storage space. Once he sensed that the poison in the air had disappeared, Gong Beichen was shocked and looked at Han Yunqi in disbelief. I'm here to court death." Han Yunqi mocked herself. Gong Beichen said angrily, "Song Qiuying? Who exactly is she?" Song Qiuying was so disheartened that she didn't want to bother with Gong Beichen. The man she loved was snatched away by Han Yunqi, and the man she had to settle for couldn't even beat Han Yunqi. What was this? Without waiting for Song Qiuying's reply, Gong Beichen felt uneasy. He immediately blew a whistle and soon, a large group of archers attacked from the top of Heaven Mountain, surrounding Han Yunqi. So many. Han Yunqi was shocked. Gong Beichen was overjoyed. "Bitch, tell me your name. If you surrender, this young master can spare your life." "Gong Beichen, you don't have the right to know who I am." Han Yunqi broke out in cold sweat. "Shoot," Gong Beichen said fiercely. In an instant, thousands of arrows were shot, all rushing towards Han Yunqi. However, no matter how fast or fierce the arrows were, they all disappeared into thin air once they got close to Han Yunqi. Gong Beichen was stunned. He didn't believe it. "Shoot! Quick! Shoot!" However, no matter how many arrows the archers shot, they all disappeared without exception. In the end, the archers ran out of arrows. They were all dumbfounded, thinking that they had encountered a ghost. Who exactly are you?" Gong Beichen was shocked as he pulled out his long sword. When the sword was unsheathed, the sword light was so strong that it hurt people's eyes. Han Yunqi was surprised. This guy's swordsmanship seemed to be quite powerful. Chapter 1062. "I'm your grandaunt." Han Yunqi answered Gong Beichen bluntly. Since he was so stupid that he couldn't guess their identities, there was no need for them to know each other. When Gong Beichen drew his sword, Han Yunqi shot out 2 poisonous needles, aiming for Gong Beichen's vitals. Han Yunqi used the shadowless needles, but Gong Beichun sensed it immediately. He turned sideways and dodged the 2 poisonous needles with a wave of his sword. This fellow was indeed the eldest disciple of the evil sword school. Although he was a little stupid, his martial arts were not to be underestimated. Although Han Yunshi might not lose in a real fight, Han Yunshi didn't want to compete with him in martial arts. Han Yunshi wanted to play poison with him. After the 2 golden needles were knocked down, Han Yunshi shot out another 4. This time it wasn't the shadowless needles, but the power and speed were on par. They flew towards Gong Beichun with great momentum. Gong Beichun felt the power of the poisonous needles and was shocked. He didn't take it head-on, but hurriedly dodged. He leaped into the air and flipped over. The poisonous needles flew past his feet before he landed back down. But the moment he landed, he saw another poisonous needle flying towards him. Gong Beichun jumped in fright. He instinctively leaned back, and the poison needle flew past him, brushing past his body. "It's poisonous!" Gong Beichun exclaimed. He immediately realized that the poisonous needles had scattered poisonous powder when they flew past. He held his breath and retreated far away. And this kind of poisonous powder was even more powerful than the one he had just scattered with the arrows. "Your poison skills aren't bad," Han Yunshi sneered. She was just testing him and immediately realized that this fellow's poison skills weren't bad either. It seemed that Bai Yanqing had taught him poison skills. Perhaps he would know his master's true identity. After the poisonous powder scattered, Gong Beichun spoke. "You are..." He thought of a woman who was very afraid of poison skills. But he definitely didn't believe that woman would come to Heaven Mountain. Besides, that woman didn't know martial arts. Master said that woman wouldn't come to Heaven Mountain for at least half a year after spring. It was also because of this that his master had given him Sky Mountain and wanted him to obtain Ganjiang as soon as possible. Usually, there would always be people from unorthodox sects who would come to Mount Tianshan to provoke them. God knows where these people came from. I already said that I'm your great aunt. If you call me grand aunt, I'll let you go. How about it? Han Yunshi's phoenix eyes contained a smile. She was lofty and magnificent. "Bitch, this is Sky Mountain. If you have the ability, then compete with me in swordsmanship. If this young master loses, you can do whatever you want with me. Do you dare?" Gong Beichun said provocatively. His swordsmanship was much stronger than his poison skills, and this woman seemed to only know how to use poison needles. She didn't even have a sword. If he were to compete with her in swordsmanship, he had a high chance of winning. Han Yunshi snorted and asked loudly, "Mist Song, is this evil sword school's young master usually such a coward? Do you only dare to fight women?" Song Qiuying's heart crumbled. She lowered her head and didn't answer. "Bitch, what did you say?" Gong Beichun was furious. "I said you're a coward. You only dare to provoke a woman like me. If you have the guts, then fight them." Han Yunshi chuckled as she pointed at Long Fei and Gu Qishao. "Just find one of them to fight. If you really have the guts, then have both of them come at you together. Do you dare?" When Song Qiuying heard this, she couldn't help but chuckle. She had forgotten her position. This was probably the biggest joke she had ever heard in her life. Gong Beichun then looked at Long Fei Yi and Gu. Long Fei Yi's handsome appearance and Gu's devastatingly beautiful appearance made his heart tremble. However, he quickly ignored it. He had been talented since he was young. He started learning swordsmanship at the age of 3. When he was 10, he was able to fight 1 against 10, becoming a genius in Evil Sword School. When he was 15, he was the leader of the Evil Sword School's younger generation. Whether it was swordsmanship or inner strength, he was number 1. Today, no one in Evil Sword School was a match for him. He was even on par with the Nirvana 6-stage elders at the peak of Heaven Mountain. Other than Elder Kenzo's disciple, Long Fei Yi, no one in Heaven Mountain was his match. "Heh! This young master disdains to fight with you." Gong Beichun slowly moved his sword and pointed at Long Fei Yi and Gu. He said arrogantly, "Then the 2 of you will fight me together. Let's be straightforward." Long Fei Yi looked over coldly without batting an eyelid. Gu suddenly looked frightened. He hurriedly ran towards Han Yunshi and hid behind Han Yunshi. "You guys can fight me one-on-one. I surrender. Gong Baichen glanced at Gu and scoffed. Long Fei Yi glared fiercely at Gu. He was clearly dissatisfied. However, he still flew over and landed in front of Gong Baichen. Watch my sword. Gong Baichen immediately attacked. Who knew that Gu would suddenly shout, Long Fei Yi, help me destroy his clothes first. I feel uncomfortable just looking at it. Gu felt that other than himself, every man in the world who wore a red robe looked especially ugly. Long Fei Yi did not move, but Gong Baichen stopped abruptly. He was shocked. What did he just hear? Long Fei Yi? Before Gong Baichen could react, Long Fei suddenly drew close and kicked him viciously in the mouth, sending him flying through the air. You're courting death by scolding this prince's woman. Long Fei Yi said coldly and suddenly closed in. Gong Baichen's mouth was crooked from the kick. As he fled, he looked at Han Yunxi in disbelief. This woman was actually Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi, whose poison skills were comparable to Master's. No, how could this be? Before Master left, he clearly told him that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi would not be coming to Tianshan in the short term. Master also said that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were at three-way black market, preparing to go to Tiger's prison to save people. At the same time, they were busy preparing for the Northern Expedition. The Northern Expedition was such a big matter. Master would definitely not make a mistake. How could they appear here? Gong Baichen could not accept this fact. However, Long Fei Yi was already closing in and kicked again. He could not avoid it and could only fight. Using all the strength in his body, he swung his sword at Long Fei's leg. In a flash, the sword reached tens of thousands of zhang, its sword chi shattering everything in its path as it swept through the mountains and overturned the seas. How much disdain did Long Fei Yi have for Gong Baichen? In the face of such a strong sword aura, he did not even draw his sword. He did not even dodge. His eyes were cold and his face was as cold as an azura. He faced the dazzling sword and continued to kick Gong Baichen. Why did this guy not dodge? Did he have a death wish? Gong Baichen was in disbelief. However, he soon saw Long Fei Yi pass through the sword aura unscathed. An extremely strong force exploded from his body, shattering the sword aura that filled the sky. What was that force? Why was it so domineering and terrifying? Was it the lustbite force that Master mentioned? Gong Baichen was dumbfounded. Long Fei Yi's leg was already closing in. Without hesitation, he kicked him in the mouth. This time, he did not kick him away. Instead, he kicked him to the ground. Bang! Gong Baichen hit the ground and felt that all the bones in his body were about to break. He looked up, his mouth and chin completely crooked. Long Fei Yi followed and stood behind him. Long Fei Yi, strip, take off your clothes. Gu Qishao shouted. Han Yunxi's mouth twitched. Why did these words sound more and more dirty? Gu, are you sure you didn't do it on purpose? Regardless of whether Gu did it on purpose or not, his words finally attracted Long Fei Yi's attention. Long Fei knitted his brows as he looked at him. Immediately, he flashed his signature smile. Long Fei, strip him of his clothes. Long Fei Yi did not say a word. He pulled Gong Baichen up and threw him at Gu. It was so fast that Gong Baichen did not have time to poison him. Gong Baichen took advantage of the situation and scattered a handful of poison powder in Gu Qishao's face. Gong Baichen grabbed this poison from his sleeve in a moment of desperation. He did not even realize that this poison was an aphrodisiac. Gu knew with a sniff. Han Yunxi was even more clear. The two of them looked at Long Fei Yi at the same time. They had the same thought. They were all curious as to whether Long Fei's frozen face would crumble if he was poisoned. He avoided Gong Baichen and wiped his face. He looked at Han Yunxi. Poison girl, stop looking. The one poisoned is me. Chi brother. The antidote, hurry. He was not like Han Yunxi, who could concoct the antidote anytime and anywhere. Although he was immune to all poisons and diseases, he still had to pretend in front of Poison Girl. Actually, it was not a deliberate act. He was already used to it. Since Bai Yanqing was not at the top of Heaven Mountain, he had dodged a bullet this time. He could continue to pretend to be crazy and slack off. In any case, Long Fei was more than capable of dealing with these clowns. He was someone who was going to do great things. Han Yunqi then realized that Gu had been poisoned with an aphrodisiac. She turned around and smiled brightly at Gu. "Skin him and I'll cure you." Gong Beichin, who had fallen to the side, was so frightened that his face turned green. Gu Qishao only laughed out loud. "Poison lass. Qi Gij likes you more and more." Gu smiled evilly and immediately walked towards Gong Beichin. Gong Beichin was kicked twice by Long Fei Yi and suffered severe internal injuries. He crawled up and ran away. Gu chased after him and grabbed a corner of his red robe. He yanked it hard and immediately tore half of his skirt. Gong Beichin did not care about his favorite red robe being torn. He used his qinggong and flew towards the top of Heaven Mountain. He shouted, "Men, stop him! Stop him!" The archers who had lost their arrows immediately surrounded Gu and stopped him. Han Yunqi grabbed Song Qiuying and watched the show with a smile. Long Fei Yi looked expressionlessly at the top of Heaven Mountain, deep in thought. Gu wanted to slack off, but he became the busiest one. A thorny vine flew out of his sleeve and caught up with Gong Beichin. It wrapped around his body and pulled him back. The archers had no other weapons in their hands, so they could only use their bows as weapons to attack Gu Qishao. Gu Qishao found them too annoying and abruptly flung out his vines. All of the thorns on the vines shot out at the surrounding archers. The archers could not dodge in time and were poisoned. Although Gong Beichin could withstand the poison of the thorny vine, he could not break free from Gu's thorny vines. He was quick-witted and slashed the thorny vines with his sword, escaping in the end. It had to be said that if Gu did not use Emosie's sword spirit, he would not be Gong Beichin's match in terms of martial arts. This made Gu Qishao very unhappy. With a dashing wave of his hand, he tossed out several thorny vine seeds. As soon as the seeds landed on the ground, countless thorny vines shot into the sky at lightning speed, wrapping around Gong Beichin in an instant. Gu Qishao shouted domineeringly, "Tear for this old man!" So, Chapter 1063. As a result, the vines wrapped around Gong Beichin scattered, each of them tearing a piece of cloth from his body. The poison and antidote hidden in Gong Beichin's clothes fell to the ground and scattered all over. Gong Beichin's sword also fell to the ground. Just like that, Gong Beichin's flashy red clothes were torn to shreds. Even his inner and undergarments were not spared, leaving only a pair of underwear. If not for Poison Lass's presence, with Gu's personality, how could he have left Gong Beichin with just a pair of underwear? The vines hooked onto strips of cloth, showing off in the air, just like their owner, arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Looking at the vines tied to his underwear, Gong Beichin's face flushed red, either from fear or embarrassment. Song Qiuying glanced at him. Her already broken heart was almost destroyed. The only thing she was clear about was that Han Yunqi and the rest did not know about her relationship with Gong Beichin. Gu soared into the air and hurriedly handed over the only antidote in his hand. "Gu, the poison in your body is about to act up. I'll give you the antidote, let me go." The only red-robed man by Long Fei and Han Yunqi's side was Gu Qishao. Gong Beichin still had this bit of common sense. Who knew that Gu would kick away Gong Beichin's antidote and say angrily, "Who wants your antidote?" It was rare for him to have the opportunity to eat the antidote personally concocted by Poison Lass. Whoever dared to spoil his plans, he would get angry. Gong Beichin was a little dumbfounded. He only felt that Gu was like a monster. Gu rubbed his chin and said playfully, "Which skin should I peel off first?" Gong Beichin was really frightened. If it were anyone else, he would have taken it as a threat. Facing Gu, he only felt fear. Just as Gu was about to make a move, an incomparably miserable cry suddenly came from the top of Heaven Mountain. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi immediately recognized Master Kenshin's voice. Long Fei Yi immediately flew to the top of Heaven Mountain. Han Yunqi grabbed Song Qiuying and chased after him. Gu pulled Gong Beichin along as he chased after them, shouting, "Poison Lass! The antidote! Where's the antidote?" Han Yunqi was no longer in the mood to joke with him. She immediately threw a pill over. However, Gu hid the pill in his sleeve and did not take it. As soon as they reached the top of Sky Mountain, they were shocked by the scene before them. On the towering stage, the Kenshin old man was tied to a huge rack. His body was covered with whip wounds, and there was a shocking scar on his chest. It was caused by a red-hot iron. In the past, this injury was nothing to the Kenshin elder. But now, Kenshin had lost all of his internal energy. His body was no different from an ordinary old man's. How could the old Kenshin bear such an injury? He had already fallen into a coma. Seeing this scene, Long Fei Ye's eyes burned with rage. He was about to draw his sword when 3 black-robed elders flew down from the top of Jochong Palace and landed in front of the Kenshin elder. Gong Beichen saw this and realized that he had hostages in his hands. In fact, he did not have to be afraid of Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi. He hurriedly shouted, "Master, save me, save me. Uncle Master?" It turned out that these 3 black-robed elders were the elders of Evil Sword School. Evil Sword School cultivated evil martial arts and could easily go berserk. Even the elders' martial arts were limited and not very good. The trouble now was that they had hostages in their hands, and there was more than one. Seeing that Gong Beichen was only left with his underwear, the 3 elders were very shocked and furious. They also knew of the commotion below, which was why they tortured Kenshin and lured Long Fei Yi and the rest up. Of course, they knew that Gong Beichen was no match for Long Fei Yi and the rest, but they did not expect Gong Beichen to be so weak and humiliated to such an extent. He was a disgrace to Evil Sword School. Great Elder angrily held his sword to Kenshin's neck and said loudly to Long Fei Yi, "Let Gong Beichen go, or you'll have to collect your master's corpse. Don't you dare." Long Fei Ye's anger shot out from his cold eyes, and Great Elder did not dare to look straight at him. However, with hostages in their hands, what did he have to be afraid of Long Fei Yi? Let's see if old man dares to. As soon as the head elder finished speaking, he made his move. But Long Fei's whip was even faster than his sword. Just as his blade was about to pierce Li Jianxin's neck, Long Fei had already lashed out with his whip. The tip of the whip was sharp and as fast as lightning, catching everyone off guard. The great elder's sword was forcefully shattered. This, in the world of martial arts, speed was the only thing that could not be defeated. To be fast, one had to have strong inner strength to support a powerful explosive force and speed. Everyone was shocked, and they were all dumbfounded, including Han Yunqi and Gu. They knew that Long Fei Yi used the lustbite power, but they did not expect it to be so strong. If the dual cultivation succeeded, wouldn't Long Fei Yi be invincible? Song Qiuying looked at Long Fei Yi from afar, her heart aching so much that she could not breathe. Why did such an outstanding and powerful man not belong to her? Why? Gong Beichen was frightened by Gu, but he was completely convinced by Long Fei Yi. He could not help but imagine how terrifying it would be if Long Fei Yi pulled out his sword. Everyone gave a start, but Long Fei didn't give the head elder any time to react. He abruptly raised his whip and lashed it at him. Great Elder subconsciously retreated. The moment he retreated, Long Fei Yi immediately flew over. It was too late for Second Elder and Third Elder to chase after him. He could only watch as Long Fei stood by Li Jianxin's side. When Long Fei Yi stood there, they knew that they had lost their hostage, Kenshin. No wonder the sect master only dared to leave Heaven Mountain after confirming that this guy would not come. This guy made people submit to him. The 3 elders did not care about Gong Beichen and Song Qiuying. They immediately flew to Juchong Hall. Long Fei Yi smashed the rack with his palm and shouted angrily, "Gu! Come here!" Seeing Long Fei Ye's angry look, Gu was frightened. Without thinking, he dragged Gong Beichen and rushed over. He threw Gong Beichen aside and hurriedly supported Kenshin. His sect was invaded and his master was imprisoned. How could Long Fei Yi not be angry and anxious? Even so, he did not forget Han Yunqi. He reached out to Han Yunqi and said coldly, "Come here." Han Yunqi grabbed Song Qiuying and flew to the stage. She pushed Song Qiuying to Gong Beichen, who had fallen to the side. She hurriedly grabbed Long Fei Ye's hand and flew to Jochong Hall with him. Gu Qishao finally recovered his wits as he watched them leave. Why was I so obedient to Long Fei's words? When Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi went to Jiucheng Hall, Lockhart Courtyard, Scripture Depository, and a group of evil sword school disciples flew down from the surrounding palaces and surrounded Gu and the two hostages. Gu was already in a bad mood. Seeing so many people watching him, he was even more unhappy. Seeing the people around him approaching, he glared fiercely. If you come any closer, I will take off Gong Beichen's pants. When he said this, all the disciples of Evil Sword School stopped in their tracks. The disciples of the courtyard and two pavilions looked at each other, not daring to move forward. Only then did Gu calm down. He tied up Song Qiuying and Gong Beichen with thorny vines and sat on the steps casually, pulling on the thorny vines. It was too difficult to drag these two people to Jiucheng Hall. He had to think of a way to get rid of these two hostages before he could chase after Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi. Gu's face was ugly as he thought of a way. The surrounding disciples looked at him, waiting for him to act rashly. Useless thing. Song Qiuying couldn't help but scold Gong Beichen. Bitch, why didn't you tell me earlier that you knew their identities? What kind of good intentions do you have? Gong Beichen questioned. You're the one who's ignorant. Song Qiuying despised Gong Beichen. She didn't even know how she had put up with it back then. Gu, let me go and I'll definitely tell you where the supremacy hid them. Gong Beichen didn't want to surrender. However, what if Gu really pulled down his pants in front of everyone? How would he have the face to continue staying in Evil Sword School? Since Gong Beichen had surrendered, Song Qiuying said anxiously, Gu, only one of the three supremacies is in their hands. The other two are in the hands of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and Hidden Scripture Pavilion elders. Help me detoxify and I'll definitely tell you. The poison hadn't acted up yet, but her heart was still clenched. Even if she fell into Han Yunqi's hands, she didn't want to end up disfigured. Gu's eyes lit up. You mean the three supremacies aren't in Jiucheng Hall? Exactly. Song Qiuying rushed to answer. Gu only knows the whereabouts of one of the supremacies. I know too. Kill him and help me detoxify. I'll definitely bring you to them. Song Qiuying. Gong Beichen was furious. I really regret cooperating with Evil Sword School. You can't do anything right. Song Qiuying said coldly. This young master must have been blind to fall for an ugly freak like you. Gong Beichen said loudly. The moment he said this, the entire place fell silent. Gu couldn't help but curse. Fuck, what kind of taste do you have? Although the surrounding disciples knew that Gong Beichen had hooked up with Mist Song in order to cooperate with Lockhart Courtyard, they were still shocked to hear Gong Beichen say it himself. Everyone was still very surprised. The disciples of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and Hidden Scripture Pavilion sneered in disdain. The disciples of Lockhart Courtyard were embarrassed and angry. A few of them actually started fighting. Song Qiuying wanted to kill herself. She never thought that her ending would be so similar to Duanmu Yao's. At this moment, three black-clothed elders suddenly escaped from Jiucheng Hall. Without a doubt, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi had broken through their ambush and knew that the supremacies weren't imprisoned in Jiucheng Hall. Seeing the chaotic scene of the disciples arguing, the black-clothed elders all stood on the side of the Evil Sword School disciples. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi landed beside Gu. Long Fei Yi asked, What's going on? Before Gu could answer, Song Qiuying burst into tears. I was wrong. I made a big mistake. I know where the supremacies are imprisoned. I'll bring you there. I'll bring you there right now. She was so afraid that Long Fei Yi would find out about her affair with Gong Beichen. This was her last dignity. Chapter 1064. There were many important things in life. However, once some people met the man they loved, the most important thing in life was to leave him with the best and most beautiful impression. Because they couldn't obtain or possess, they could only give. But what he wanted, they couldn't give him anything but an impression. At the very least, he would know what kind of woman there was in this world. Song Qiuying knew that her impression in Long Fei Yi's heart had been completely destroyed, but no matter what, she still had to try her best to salvage it and minimize the bad impression. However, A sharp voice interrupted Song Chioying's final beautiful dream. Eldest young Mist Song, you were the one who got together with Gong Baichen first and led the people from Evil Sword School to the top of Heaven Mountain. What, now you want to change sides? The one who spoke was none other than Hidden Sword Pavilion's second elder. He walked out of the crowd with 3 treasured swords in his hands and casually threw them on the ground. Long Fei Yi recognized these 3 treasured swords at a glance. These 3 treasured swords belonged to the 2 venerables. Song Chioying's face flushed red as she looked at Long Fei Yi. But who knew that Long Fei Yi didn't take her matter to heart at all? Song Chioying finally realized how much she thought of herself as unrequited love. She originally thought that she could at least leave an impression on him. But who knew that he treated her like air? Long Fei Yi, other than Han Yunxi, could there be any other woman in your eyes? Even if it was just a serious look? Long Fei Yi looked at Second Elder and said coldly, "They're in your hands? The Great Venerable and the Venerable are in Old Third's hands. However, I can represent Hidden Sword Pavilion and Scripture Pavilion to negotiate with you, the future sect leader," Second Elder said loudly. As soon as these words came out, the 3 elders of Evil Sword School were immediately dissatisfied. Great Elder said angrily, "What do you mean?" The second elder ignored the first elder of the Evil Sword School. He and the third elder had always been fence-sitters. Back then, the sect master of the Evil Sword School had promised them that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi would not come to Tianshan so soon. Now that the people from Evil Sword School had slapped themselves in the face, how could they keep their word? The Evil Sword School's master poisoned the 3 venerables, and the 3 elders of the Evil Sword School imprisoned the 3rd venerable, while the Sword Pavilion and the Scripture Pavilion imprisoned the Great Venerable and the 2nd Venerable. They had agreed that once the Evil Sword School obtained the treasured sword Ganjiang, the people of the Evil Sword School would leave Sky Mountain. The Academy and 2 pavilions would split Sky Mountain and establish their own schools. Now that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were here, Long Fei Ye's martial arts were above everyone else's when he left. Now that he was even stronger, they would only be asking for trouble if they didn't surrender. Second Elder ignored the Evil Sword School and said to Long Fei Yi, "As long as you destroy these bastards from the Poison Sect and cripple Lockhart Courtyard, my Sword Pavilion and the Scripture Pavilion are willing to hand over the 2 venerables and help you ascend to the position of sect head." TSK, TSK, TSK. Han Yunxi sighed inwardly. How was Second Elder surrendering? Was he trying to tempt or threaten? But where did he get the confidence to tempt Long Fei Yi? And where did he get the courage to threaten Long Fei Yi? Long Fei Yi was expressionless and didn't say a word. Evil Sword School's first elder and the other 2 elders exchanged glances, realizing that the situation was dire. If Evil Sword School refused to budge and Long Fei Yi agreed to second elder's demands, wouldn't Evil Sword School become the target of public criticism? Left with no choice, Evil Sword School's first elder spoke up. "Long Fei Yi, we won't interfere in Tianshan Kenzo's internal affairs. Release Gong Baichen and Old Man will immediately invite the 3rd venerated elder out. We'll write this matter off." Evil Sword School and the 2 pavilions' elders had both expressed their intentions to reconcile with Long Fei Yi. Wouldn't Lockhart Courtyard be in for a tragedy? Song Chioying was so desperate that she couldn't care about anything else. At this moment, Song Chioying's 4th senior brother stood up. "Long Fei Yi, if you want to see Granny Yu again, expel Evil Sword School from Tianshan Mountain and cripple 2nd Elder and 3rd Elder. These 2 hypocrites, Lockhart Courtyard's disciples, are willing to serve you forever." Hearing this, Han Yunxi only smiled coldly in her heart. So this group of people's cooperation was so fragile. Both sides had hostages, so why didn't they unite and fight to the death? But reality proved that it was useless even if they were united. Because even if they tried to curry favor and make concessions, Long Fei Yi wouldn't be willing to accept. What's more, there was a hidden threat in their words. Long Fei Yi looked at them and retorted coldly, "What right do you have to negotiate with this crown prince?" Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect Long Fei Yi to be so arrogant as to reject them. Everyone unsheathed their weapons. Second Elder couldn't believe it and asked, "Long Fei Yi, do you really not care about the supremacy's life or death?" Those who can't protect Tianshan Mountain are all trash. Why should this prince care about them? Long Fei Yi said as he slowly pulled out his profound frost sword. The moment the profound frost sword was unsheathed, it emitted a dazzling sword light. Long Fei Yi hadn't even made a move and his sword had already intimidated everyone. At this moment, everyone present was truly united. They formed groups of 3 to 5 and covered each other. They were on high alert and held their swords tightly, ready to deal with Long Fei Yi's attack at any time. At this moment, Evil Sword School's first elder shouted, "Leave Han Yunqi and Gu to the 3 of us. You guys surround and attack Long Fei Yi." With that, Long Fei Yi's sword stabbed backward, right into Gong Beichen's heart. He pulled out his sword and blood splattered everywhere. Han Yunqi and Gu hurriedly dodged. Seeing this, Song Qiuying seemed to have realized something and looked at Long Fei Yi in disbelief. However, before she could say anything, Long Fei Yi's sword slashed across Song Qiuying's neck. Just like that, Song Qiuying's eyes widened. Until her death, all she saw was Long Fei Yi's back. He didn't turn back. Everyone was intimidated by Long Fei Yi's ruthless actions. Those 2 people were his hostages, and he actually killed them just like that. What else could threaten him? While everyone was panicking, Long Fei Yi handed the profound frost sword to Han Yunqi and said indifferently, "Hold it well and follow me to kill the enemy." Long Fei Yi used his scabbard as a sword, and the way he held the scabbard was shocking. "As you command, Your Highness," Han Yunqi said loudly. She held the sword and pointed it to the sky. 10th level Nirvana realm power rushed from her palm to the profound frost sword, causing it to shine brightly once again. More than half of the people present cultivated the Nirvana realm power. Even the people from Evil Sword School who didn't cultivate the Nirvana realm power were familiar with it. They all recognized that it was the Nirvana realm power and were all stunned at the same time. Who would have thought that the former trash Han Yunqi had already cultivated the full level of the Nirvana realm power? Even the elders of Heavenly Mountain hadn't been able to do it until now. In other words, other than Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi's internal energy was the best. Heavens! This woman! Everyone didn't know what to say. Other than shock, there was more shock. Seeing Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi so dazzling, how could Gu be willing to be ordinary? He kicked away Gong Beichen's corpse and stood up. "Count me in. Today, I'll kill to my heart's content." After he said that, he raised his hand handsomely and brought out Immerse's sword spirit. The sword's shape couldn't be seen, but the sword's shape could be seen. The sword's light was faint, but it contained boundless power. Immerse's sword spirit. Heavens! It's Immerse's sword spirit. Immerse's sword spirit has appeared. Evil Sword School's great elder exclaimed. While the sect master was looking for the treasured sword Ganjiang, he was also looking for Immerse's sword spirit. Immerse's treasured sword was already destroyed, but the sword spirit's power was still not to be underestimated. Gu actually controlled Immerse's sword spirit? If not for the head elder's shout, no one would know what kind of treasure Gu Qishao's invisible sword was. Hearing the head elder's words, they were all stunned speechless. Which swordsman didn't know Immerse's Ganjiang? Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi, and Gu, the 3 of them stood back to back, each holding a sword. Their sword energies were different, but they were all so powerful that no one dared to underestimate them. The people surrounding them all retreated, and no one dared to take the lead. At this moment, Gu Beiyue stood on the side of the palace, quietly watching this scene. His white robe fluttered, and his black hair danced. He smiled, and his gaze was gentle. He stood aloof from the world, unmoved by honor or disgrace. He was a spectator and also a protector. He had already settled everything at the foot of the mountain and had come up long ago. He had already searched more than half of the mountain peak, and was only resting here to take a look at the princess's dazzling, noble, and magnificent appearance. Even though he missed her, he didn't hesitate and quickly disappeared into thin air to continue his search. What was Gu Beiyue's heart made of? How warm was it and how cold was it? Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi, and Gu hadn't even made a move. but they had already crushed the morale and fighting spirit of everyone present. The disparity in strength was so great that many disciples began to flee in all directions. Soon enough, a large group of people had fled down the mountain. Waiting for them were the disciples of the 55 depositories of the fourth peak, as well as Granny Yu and the abstinence courtyard disciples who had already rescued Gu Beiwei. Second elder wanted to flee, as did the 3 elders of the evil sword school, but Gu and Han Yunqi separated to stop them. Long Fei Yi faced them directly. Second elder was so shocked that he was the first to kneel and surrender. Fei, for your master's sake, spare your martial uncle this time. He's willing to. Long Fei Yi looked down at him from high above and said coldly, "Not everyone has the right to surrender to this crown prince." So speaking, the scabbard slashed down on Second Elder's head. Second Elder raised his sword to block, but his sword broke and he died. The 3 elders of the evil sword school couldn't escape, but they didn't know if they should surrender. They finally realized that this young man was even more frightening than their sect leader. Long Fei Yi didn't make a move, but retreated to one side. "Yunqi, let me give you some practice. I'll give you the time it takes to brew a cup of tea." Gu smiled. "Poison lass, no rush, no rush. Let's take it slow." Seeing Second Elder's miserable death, the 3 elders didn't dare to negotiate any terms. They all fell to their knees while the head elder handed over a key. "Your Highness Crown Prince, Your Highness Princess, this is the key to imprisoning third honored elder. I'll take you there now." Naturally, Long Fei Yi wouldn't really give up on the 3 honored elders. He'd killed second elder because third elder of Hidden Sword Court hadn't shown up yet. With third elder around, he'd be able to find the honored elders. As for the 3 elders of the evil sword school, he couldn't kill them so quickly. Otherwise, how were they supposed to flatten the evil sword school? "All right, I'll spare you all for now." Han Yunqi accepted the key graciously. At this moment, a familiar voice called out from the side. "Fei, hurry. There's not enough time. Hurry." Chapter 1065. Following the sound, they saw Gu Beiwei rushing over with head honored elder in tow. Han Yunqi and the rest were surprised. They never expected Gu Beiwei to move so quickly. Not only did he take care of the people at the foot of the mountain, but he even saved head elder. He went up and down the mountain to find him. "Fei, hurry. Hurry to Nirvana Gorge, the sword ceiling platform's about to crack." Head honored elder was so anxious that he didn't even care about the pain in his organs. He and second honored elder had both been poisoned and locked up on the top floor of Hidden Sword Depository under third elder's personal watch. They could hear the commotion at the peak, but had no idea what was going on. It wasn't until Gu Beiwei captured third elder and rescued them that they realized Fei and Yunqi had returned. The head of Evil Sword School wasn't on Celestial Mountain, so Fei's sword skills and Yunqi's poison skills were enough to deal with the traitors of the Evil Sword Sect and the depositories and courtyards. Thus, they immediately had Gu Beiwei take them to Nirvana Gorge. Nirvana Gorge was Tianshan Kenzo's most forbidden area. Within it was a sword ceiling platform that locked up the ancient sword Ganjiang. Tianshan Kenzo's ancestors had found the sword in the past, but were unable to subdue it. Thus, they built the platform and used up all of their strength to seal the sword within. Evil Sword School seemed to be occupying Celestial Mountain this time, but they were actually aiming for Ganjiang. The head of Evil Sword School had limited internal energy, so he couldn't subdue Ganjiang. But before he left, he destroyed the platform to threaten the 3 honored elders. This was because once the sword ceiling platform was destroyed, Ganjiang's sword soul would slowly awaken within a year. The head of Evil Sword School was waiting for the awakening of Ganjiang's sword spirit to force the 3 honored elders to work together to subdue it. The 3 honored elders were all at the maximum level of Nirvana Heart Arts and had unfathomable internal energy, but they still couldn't subdue Ganjiang. They did not inform the Evil Sword School master of this fact. They were hoping that they could regain their freedom before the Ganjiang sword spirit awakened. Then, they could work together to seal the Ganjiang sword spirit in the sword sealing platform. But unexpectedly, when he and Second Venerable rushed to the sword sealing platform, they discovered that the Ganjiang sword soul was awakening. Logically speaking, If the Ganjiang sword spirit was about to awaken, there would be a sign. At the very least, they could sense it from the top of Mount Tianshan. But this time, there were no signs at all, making it hard to figure out. They didn't have the time to think too much about it. Once the Ganjiang sword soul was fully awakened, it wouldn't be easy to suppress it. If he could not suppress it, Ganjiang would definitely fly away from Sky Mountain. Once Ganjiang left Tianshan, it would not be easy to find it again. The Great Venerable didn't know if they could still seal the awakening Ganjiang sword soul with their current strength, but they had to try no matter what. When Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi learned of this situation, although they had many doubts, they couldn't be bothered to ask. "Gu, look after them." After Long Fei Yi said this, he and Han Yunqi followed the Great Venerable back to Nirvana Valley. Han Yunqi didn't stay idle along the way. She carefully examined the poison in the Great Venerable's body and concocted an antidote for him. When Gu couldn't see their backs, he came back to his senses and realized that he was alone again. How could he be happy that he couldn't participate in such a big show? The entire Mount Tianshan was in chaos. Some disciples surrendered, some fled, and some fought. Granny Yu, who was imprisoned at the bottom of the mountain, had already killed her way to the top of Mount Tianshan. She just happened to be fighting with several experts of the evil sword school. No matter how chaotic the situation was, no matter which side had the upper hand, no one dared to provoke Gu on the stage. Even the experts of the evil sword school didn't dare to think of saving the 3 clan elders. In the midst of the chaos, Gu sat cross-legged on the ground. His face was gloomy. His hands were fiddling with something. There seemed to be some pills in his palms. No one knew what he was doing. The 3 clan elders of the evil sword school squatted in front of him. The 3 of them had already exchanged a few glances, planning on how to escape. Although Gu had Emosie's sword spirit, but he wasn't Long Fei Yi. It was impossible to escape right under Long Fei's nose. But to escape from Gu's eyes, if they cooperated well, there was still some hope. No matter what, they had to have someone return to Evil Sword Sect to take charge of the situation. If not, when Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi found them, Evil Sword Sect would be in danger. Sect Master was far away. Distant water couldn't put out a nearby fire. Helplessly, they had really underestimated Gu. Gu was scary when he wasn't serious. But when he was serious, he was even scarier. Long Fei Yi didn't know how to poison, but Gu did. And he was an expert. Just as the great clan elder signaled to the 2nd and 3rd clan elder to take action, Gu's sleeves suddenly shot out a few thorny vines. Once again they were bound. Although the great clan elder's hands were bound, he still held onto his sword. He said anxiously, "Gu, since when did you become Long Fei Ye's lackey? Why don't you?" Before he could finish, Gu stuffed a poison pill into his mouth. The great clan elder had no choice but to swallow it. He asked in shock, "What did you feed me?" Gu ignored him. He gestured with his finger for the thorny vines to bring the 2nd and 3rd clan elder to him. The 2nd and 3rd clan elder were terrified. They immediately pulled out their swords to cut the thorny vines. But what shocked them was that these thorny vines were different from the previous ones. They couldn't cut them at all. Very quickly, their swords were snatched away by the thorny vines. Gu fiercely pinched their chins and fed them the poison. He then turned around and left. He walked a few steps but turned back. At this time, the great clan elder had already fainted from the poison. The 2nd and 3rd clan elder were terrified. They couldn't guess what Gu wanted to do next. Who knew that Gu squatted down beside the great clan elder? He pulled out a dagger from his calf and cut off the great clan elder's tongue. Although the unconscious great clan elder didn't feel any pain, his tongue started to bleed. A blood-red thorny vine grew out from the great clan elder's mouth. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws, trapping the 2nd and 3rd clan elder. Gu's face was gloomy. He slowly wiped the dagger clean before turning around to leave. The 2nd and 3rd clan elder couldn't find the words to describe their fear. They were so glad that they didn't say anything. Otherwise, the great clan elder's fate would be the end of their lives. This Gu might not be as easy to provoke as Long Fei Yi. Gu's face was gloomy. He shouted, "Who is Granny Yu? Come out now. Once he said that, the chaotic surroundings quietened down. Granny Yu was surrounded by a few experts from the evil sword school. She descended from the sky and shouted, "Seventh young Master Gu, I'm here. Bring me to Nirvana Valley. Hurry." Gu was anxious. Granny Yu was in a difficult position. If not for the poison and the restriction of her inner strength, she wouldn't have been trapped by a few evil sword sect disciples. But when Gu Qishao glanced over, all of the experts tactfully stepped aside. After Granny Yu successfully escaped, she immediately brought Gu to Nirvana Valley. When the evil sword school disciples saw that the great clan elder was dead and the second and third clan elders were trapped, they accepted the fact that the situation was hopeless. They didn't continue to fight and escaped. Nirvana Valley was deep in the valley behind the 9th temple. Before Granny Yu and Gu arrived, they could already feel the strong sword chi ahead. If it was someone with weaker inner strength, they would have been injured by the sword chi before even seeing the treasured sword Ganjiang. The two of them hurried on, but who knew that Gu would suddenly stop? It was as if his acupoints had been sealed and he was frozen stiff. "Seventh young Master Gu, what's wrong?" Granny Yu was shocked. Gu didn't answer. It was as if he had gone berserk, his eyes suddenly turning scarlet. Granny Yu was an experienced and knowledgeable person. She had no idea why Gu would react like that. She nudged Gu and asked, "Seventh young Master Gu, what's wrong with you?" After asking a few more times, Gu didn't answer her. He just stared blankly ahead. Seeing that there was no one around, Granny Yu didn't dare delay and hurriedly flew towards the sword ceiling platform. When Granny Yu arrived, she saw Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi fighting with the two supremacies, using their nirvana powers to suppress the Ganjiang sword spirit. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi were both at the maximum level of nirvana powers. The two supremacies were also at the maximum level. In addition to Gu Beiwei, who was assisting them, there were 5 of them. However, even with the 5 of them working together, they were still at a disadvantage against the Ganjiang sword spirit. It looked as if they were about to be overwhelmed by the Ganjiang sword spirit. Granny Yu was so anxious that she forgot about Gu and hurriedly joined in. Although her inner strength was limited, she was still a force to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, Granny Yu's participation was just a drop in the bucket. As the Ganjiang sword spirit gradually awoke, its power grew stronger and stronger. Long Fei Yi withdrew his nirvana powers and used the powerful lustbite power instead. Only then did the Ganjiang sword spirit weaken slightly. But soon enough, it grew stronger and stronger until it was obvious that it was suppressing the two supremacies. "Fei, we can't hold on any longer." Although the head elder didn't want to admit it, it was the truth. "Let's give up. If we keep going, we'll only waste our inner strength," Gu Beiwei said. Everyone had already used all their strength and tried their best. But Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi both had taut faces as if unwilling to give up. In their lives, there was only don't want, not give up. "Princess, even if Ganjiang leaves Kenzo, no one in the world can subdue it. Why waste everyone's inner strength? There are still many things waiting for us." Gu Beiwei coaxed again. Gu was right. Even if Ganjiang left the sword ceiling platform and disappeared, it wouldn't affect them much in the short term. If they couldn't subdue Ganjiang, who else could? It was precisely because Bai Yanqing didn't have the skills that he was forcing the 3 honored elders. Han Yunqi was about to give up when a thought flashed through her mind. After some hesitation, she said, "Give me one more chance. I'll try." Everyone agreed, but they didn't know what she was going to do. The 2 honored elders and Granny Yu were still unaware of the matter of Phoenix energy. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiwei knew, but they never guessed it was Phoenix energy. Han Yunqi could only control a limited amount of Phoenix energy right now, so it wasn't as strong as a full-level Nirvana heart. But Han Yunqi wanted to test her Phoenix energy. Would there be a miracle? Chapter 1066. A miracle really did happen. As soon as Han Yunqi used her Phoenix energy, the Ganjiang sword spirit's power weakened. To be more precise, it wasn't weak, but less aggressive. What's going on? Everyone exhaled in relief at the same time. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue didn't understand that Han Yunqi's phoenix energy wasn't even as strong as her nirvana heart arts. Why did the Ganjiang sword spirit seem to be yielding? At this moment, head honored elder and second honored elder exclaimed in unison, "Phoenix energy! That's the power of the phoenix." They all looked at Han Yunqi in shock. Yes, phoenix energy. She was forced by the celestial fire in the medicine requesting cave and obtained it by chance. According to Old Man Alchemy's words, the phoenix energy was originally hidden in her body and could be awakened. Long Fei Yi explained immediately. The situation was too urgent. Although they'd met with the honored elders, they didn't have time to explain their situation. If their letter from the medicine requesting cave had fallen into by Yanqing's hands, then the honored elders and Master Kenshin wouldn't know that Han Yunqi had obtained phoenix energy by chance or that their dual cultivation had failed. While the Ganjiang sword spirit's power was still calm, Long Fei Yi gave them a concise explanation. The two honored elders exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. No wonder, no wonder. Head honored elder shook his head. No wonder, Fei. No wonder you failed to dual cultivate. Second honored elder grinned. When they saw Fei use both his nirvana heart arts and lustbite arts, the two honored elders knew that he hadn't succeeded in dual cultivation and merged the two powers into one. Under these circumstances, they didn't have time to ask questions. They simply assumed that Long Fei Yi was too busy to start dual cultivation. They never expected it to be because of the phoenix energy. Old Man Alchemy hadn't lied to them, and by Yanqing's forged letter had truly tricked them. Fei, it's fortunate that your alchemy furnace was there. Head honored elder sighed with emotion. What do you mean? Han Yunqi was anxious. Actually, she had thought that the phoenix power was not an internal energy, so it could not be compared to the nirvana power in terms of size and strength. That was why she wanted to use the phoenix power to make a bet. She didn't expect that she would win the bet again. Just as the Great Venerable was about to explain, the Ganjiang Sword Soul's power suddenly grew stronger. A resolute look flashed past the Great Venerable's eyes. He decided to take a gamble. He hurriedly retracted his inner energy and said to the Second Venerable, Gu Beiyue, and Granny Yu, all of you, back off. Let the two of them try. Although everyone didn't understand the situation, they still listened to the Great Venerable's words and withdrew. But as soon as they did, the Ganjiang Sword Soul's power suddenly weakened, along with its sword on. Just a moment ago, the sword radiance was so dazzling that no one could clearly see the Ganjiang sword. But now, everyone could clearly see that it was a bronze longsword. The sword was more than half unsheathed, standing majestically on the sword-sealing platform. It was like a noble king, standing indomitable and overlooking the crowd. Perhaps the legends of the past were poignant and beautiful, but after thousands of years of bloodshed, the legend had changed. Ganjiang was no longer the name of a swordsmith. It was the name of a treasured sword. Ganjiang was the king of swords. The Great Venerables group stared at the Ganjiang sword in awe. Their hearts were filled with reverence. Of course, they were also rejoicing that the Ganjiang sword soul hadn't left its scabbard yet. Otherwise, no one would be able to keep it in check. The Great Venerables group couldn't sense the Ganjiang sword soul's power, but Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi could clearly sense that all of its power was concentrated on the sword. It was restless and ready to explode. This power was clearly much stronger than before. Long Fei Yi, since we can't seal it, why don't we try? Han Yunqi's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. Why don't we subdue it? If they couldn't seal it, how could they subdue it? Only Han Yunqi had such ambitions. But the Great Venerable suddenly shouted, Fei, have Yunqi use her phoenix energy to help you subdue Ganjiang. Quick! Long Fei Yi was about to agree to Han Yunqi's request, but hearing the Great Venerable's words made him want to try even more. He immediately took to the skies to approach the Ganjiang sword soul, Han Yunqi following closely behind to stand by his side. As soon as the two of them drew close, they felt a strong repulsive force trying to push them away. Long Fei Yi gripped Han Yunqi's hand tightly. One used lustbite energy, and the other her phoenix energy to resist the Ganjiang sword soul's repulsive force. At the same time, Long Fei Yi reached out a hand towards the sword's hilt. His hand gathered all of his strength to slowly penetrate the Ganjiang sword soul's power and approach the sword's hilt. As his hand drew closer, the sword began to vibrate with a clatter. The closer he got, the stronger the repulsive force. Long Fei Yi found it increasingly difficult. Han Yunqi didn't know how to help Long Fei Yi besides helping him resist the repulsive force. Blue veins popped out on the back of Long Fei Yi's hand and arm. There were even a few wounds left by the sword chi. Han Yunqi's heart ached at the sight. She was going to risk it all. She also reached out her hand and covered the back of Long Fei Yi's hand, approaching the sword's hilt with him. Soon, the sharp sword chi cut through her sleeves and her skin. "Let go," Long Fei Yi said coldly and fiercely. "I won't let go, unless you take this sword." Han Yunqi also said coldly and fiercely. Long Fei Yi immediately covered Han Yunqi's slender hand with his other hand. However, as soon as he covered it, Han Yunqi covered it with her other hand. In fact, Long Fei Yi couldn't do anything about Han Yunqi's stubbornness most of the time. Streaks of blood gradually appeared on her sleeves. Long Fei Yi felt like his heart was being cut by a knife. His eyes turned cold and in an instant, he gathered all of the lust bite power into his hand. Han Yunqi seemed to be waiting for this moment. She also gathered all of the phoenix power into Long Fei Yi's hand. In an instant, a powerful force erupted from their overlapping hands and completely shook off the Ganjiang sword spirit's power. Long Fei Yi held onto the Ganjiang sword's hilt, while Han Yunqi's hand covered the back of his hand. The two of them worked together and slowly pressed the sword into the scabbard. When the sword entered the scabbard, all of the Ganjiang sword spirit's power disappeared. Long Fei Yi held the Ganjiang sword firmly in his hand. The two of them looked at each other and smiled tacitly. That power just now was so familiar. Wasn't it the power they obtained together when they were dual cultivating? When husband and wife worked together, there was nothing they couldn't do in this world. Long Fei Yi lowered his head and pressed his forehead intimately against Han Yunqi's forehead. He looked at Han Yunqi's hand that was full of scars and felt heartache and helplessness. Han Yunqi was extremely happy. "Long Fei Yi, Ganjiang is already in your bag. Give me the profound frost sword." It was rare for Han Yunqi to ask for something from him. But Long Fei Yi actually didn't give it to her. "Give me some time. I'll forge the Immerse sword for you. Profound frost, I can't give it to you," Long Fei Yi said and wanted to bring Han Yunqi away from the sword sealing platform. One must know that Great Venerable and the rest were still waiting below. But Han Yunqi stopped him. She didn't care how many people were waiting below. She didn't care what kind of explanation Great Venerable Lord would give for their dual cultivation and phoenix power. She pulled Long Fei Yi and asked seriously, "If you can't give it to me, then who can you give it to?" "I'll keep it." Long Fei Yi pursed his lips, trying to hold back his laughter. "Keep it for who?" Han Yunqi asked again. It was rare for her to ask for something from him, but he actually refused. She didn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. Thinking about it, there were many people who wanted this profound frost sword. Duanmu Yao had some bad intentions. Long Fei Yi smiled but didn't say anything. His reaction made Han Yunqi even more certain that he wanted to give the profound frost sword to someone else. Perhaps other things could be discussed. But this profound frost sword was absolutely out of the question. The profound frost sword was the sword that Long Fei Yi had carried with him for more than 10 years. It had accompanied Long Fei Yi for even longer than she had. Moreover, during their 3 months of dual cultivation, they had shared the same sword every night. The significance of this was too great. Han Yunqi would rather not have Immerse than give up the profound frost sword. "Who do you want to keep it for? Are you going to say it or not?" Han Yunqi asked seriously. Long Fei Yi finally couldn't help but laugh. He leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Leave it for your daughter, okay?" Han Yunqi didn't expect this. She stared blankly for a long time before bursting into laughter. After laughing for a long time, she asked, "Why not leave it for your son?" The person who was about to ascend the throne actually asked her for a daughter, and not a son? What should Han Yunqi say to him? "My daughter is like you. I like my daughter. Long Fei Yi was rarely so direct. Han Yunxi no longer avoided this topic. She looked up at him and said seriously, Your Highness, Chanxie will remember this. If the anxious crowd below knew that the two of them were discussing this topic on the sword-locking platform, how would they feel? Long Fei Yi took the Ganjiang sword and flew down with Han Yunxi. Everyone immediately surrounded them. Even someone as calm as Gu Beiyue revealed a happy expression. This was simply too unexpected. They were supposed to seal Ganjiang, but they'd subdued it instead. It has to be them. It has to be them. Head Honored Elder was the most informed. Head Honored Elder, you? Han Yunxi didn't understand. Just then, Head Honored Elder had said that they were lucky to have come to the medicine hut. Just what was going on? If Yunxi didn't have phoenix energy hidden in her body, then their dual cultivation would have been completed long ago. But if there's phoenix energy hidden within Yunxi's body, then even if it's not awakened, your dual cultivation will still fail. Head Honored Elder controlled his breathing, extremely excited. Dual cultivation with lustbite energy requires 1 yin and 1 yang, 1 strong and 1 weak, 1 main and 1 auxiliary. If Yunxi is too strong, then you'll only have 2 options. 1 is for Fei to find someone else to dual cultivate with, 2 is for you to find a pair of weapons that can be subdued by both lustbite energy and phoenix energy. These weapons need 1 yin and 1 yang, 1 weak and 1 strong. Only by using weapons to support dual cultivation will you have a chance of success. There was no need for Head Honored Elder to explain further. Everyone understood why he was so excited. Just then, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi used lustbite energy and phoenix energy to subdue Ganjiang. Ganjiang and Immerse then became husband and wife swords, 1 yin and 1 yang. Isn't that what Long Fei Yi and Immerse needed for their dual cultivation? If that was the case, they really had to thank their trip to the medicine hut. If they hadn't drawn out Han Yunxi's phoenix energy, they might never have found the reason for their dual cultivation failure. They finally understood why their dual cultivation had failed and found a way to solve the problem. Fei, it's a good thing you came. Head Honored Elder grew serious in his excitement. If your dual cultivation fails and you can't fix it after a year, the two of you will definitely suffer from cultivation deviation and kill each other. At his words, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi felt a lingering fear. They looked towards Gu Beiyue. Although this was a cruel choice, it was the right one. While everyone was sighing with emotion, Granny Yu suddenly cried out, Gu! Chapter 1067. Only then did Granny Yu remember Gu. Fei, something's happened to Sir Gu Qi. Quick, come with me. Granny Yu was frantic. Long Fei Yi wasn't in a rush, but Han Yunxi was. What's wrong with him? Gu had Immerse's sword spirit and his poison arts to protect him. It wouldn't be hard for him to deal with the 3 surrendered evil sword school elders. I don't know what's wrong with him either. Come with me. Granny Yu hurried back the way they'd come, so everyone followed. But they hadn't gone very far before they saw Gu Qishao walking towards them. Perfectly fine. What's wrong with him? Long Fei Yi finally spoke. I just brought him here. But he suddenly turned stupid and stood there unmoving. No matter how I called him, he didn't respond. Now why? Granny Yu grew more and more bewildered. From a distance, Gu really was unscathed and perfectly normal. Long Fei Yi didn't speak, but when Gu drew closer, everyone realized something was off. Granny Yu and the 2 honored elders didn't sense it too clearly, but Long Fei Yi and the rest who were familiar with Gu could tell right away that something was wrong with him. To be more precise, it was the way he looked at Long Fei Yi that was very strange. If this was any other time, Gu wouldn't even look Long Fei Yi in the eye. If he did, it would be with a look of lofty disdain. But his gaze hadn't left Long Fei's side since he'd arrived. His long, narrow eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion. Han Yunxi didn't like the look in his eyes. She subconsciously walked over to Long Fei Ye's side and grabbed Long Fei Ye's hand. Long Fei Yi was bewildered, but he remained calm. He glared coldly at Gu, but Gu Qishao was still staring at him. Long Fei Yi said coldly, What are you looking at? Long Fei Yi, Why am I? Gu was confused. Why do I have the guts to? He thought for a long time but couldn't come up with a reason. Long Fei Ye's cold face had already darkened. Han Yunqi couldn't help but say, "What kind of guts are you talking about? What's wrong with you?" "There's a feeling." Gu pondered for a while before replying thoughtfully, "There's a very complicated feeling." As soon as these words came out, everyone was stunned. "What do you mean by a particularly complicated feeling? Why did it sound so ambiguous?" The entire place was silent. Gu and Long Fei Yi looked at each other. Gu's devastatingly beautiful face was filled with confusion, giving people an indescribable feeling of joy. As for Long Fei Yi, his face couldn't be any uglier. Long Fei Yi had seen many adoring gazes in his life, but this was the first time he was stared at so ambiguously by a man. Was Gu flirting with him, or was he provoking him? He was simply tired of living. In the silence, while Gu was still confused, Long Fei Yi suddenly drew his sword. He didn't draw his profound frost sword, but the ancient sword Ganjiang that he had just obtained. Ganjiang had a temper. After being subdued by Long Fei Yi, it could feel Long Fei Ye's emotions. Hence, when the sword was unsheathed, its sword aura was sharp and murderous. But who knew that when Ganjiang was unsheathed, Gu was suddenly stunned. Just like before, as though his acupoints were pressed, he didn't move at all. Even his expression was stiff. The only difference was that at this moment, he was staring at Ganjiang in Long Fei Ye's hand. Everyone was shocked. Gu Beiwei nudged Gu, but he didn't react. Granny Yu hurriedly said, "That's right, he was like that just now." "Could it be?" Han Yunqi muttered. "Could it be because—" Long Fei Yi seemed to have thought of the reason as well, and suddenly pressed Ganjiang back into its sheath. Once the sword was sheathed, Gu immediately returned to his senses. He didn't seem to know what had just happened, and his expression became even more confused. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi, and Gu Beiwei looked at each other, as though they had discovered some secret. Granny Yu and the two supremacies didn't know what was going on. Long Fei examined Gu Qishao from head to toe thoughtfully before unsheathing Ganjiang. Gu immediately stiffened again. When Long Fei Yi sheathed the sword again, Gu immediately regained his senses. This was repeated several times, and it worked every time. Finally, when Long Fei was about to sheath his sword again, Gu Qishao shouted, "Enough!" He had finally cleared his head after searching all the way here, but Long Fei Ye's torment had thrown him into disarray again. There were moments when he couldn't even control himself. It was rare for Long Fei Yi to take a liking to a game and become addicted to it. He ignored Gu and pulled out Ganjiang again. In a flash, Gu Qishao froze again. Long Fei Ye's speed of pulling out and sheathing the sword increased, causing Gu to wake up again and again. His head was so dizzy that he couldn't even stand straight. Han Yunqi and Gu Beiwei were already laughing uncontrollably. Head-honored elder couldn't help but ask, "Fei, just what's going on?" Long Fei Yi finally sheathed the sword, causing Gu to regain his senses. Before Long Fei Yi could speak, Gu summoned Immerse's sword spirit and roared, "What kind of lousy thing is this? This old man doesn't want it anymore." No matter how stupid Gu was, he still understood that Immerse's sword spirit was causing trouble. When Immerse's sword spirit saw Ganjiang, it was led away and even implicated him to be played by Long Fei Yi. Gu was stupefied when Ganjiang appeared, but Immerse's sword spirit didn't move at all. This was because Long Fei Yi could keep it under control. Head-honored elder and second-honored elder were alarmed at the sight of Immerse's sword spirit. This is Immerse's sword spirit. This is Immerse's sword spirit. Sir Gu Qi, how did Immerse's sword spirit end up in your hands? By the time Granny Yu reached the peak, Gu had already put away Immerse's sword spirit. This was Granny Yu's first time seeing it, so she couldn't believe her eyes. The Ganjiang sword was locked up at the peak, but Immerse's sword spirit had long been destroyed. Immerse's sword spirit had also vanished from the Jianghu for a long time. The three of them never expected to see Immerse's sword spirit again in their lifetime, much less that it would be under Gu's control. Han Yunqi told them about their experiences in Qingchuan Water City. causing the two honored elders and Granny Yu to sigh with emotion. This really is effortless. Fei, old man was worried that you wouldn't be able to find Immerse within a year, but now it looks like there's hope for your dual cultivation as long as we can reforge Immerse's sword. Head honored elder was thrilled. Second honored elder and Granny Yu stared at Immerse's sword spirit, unable to tear their eyes away. What swordsman didn't love treasured swords? The Ganjiang sword was too powerful, so they could only admire it from afar. Immerse's sword spirit was female, so it was gentler than the Ganjiang sword. Moreover, it only had a sword spirit and not a sword body, so it only had half of its original strength. That was why they had a chance to observe it up close. Reforging a sword. Long Fei Yi was lost in thought. Finding Immerse's sword spirit at Qingchuan Water City had been an accident, and finding the Ganjiang sword back at Celestial Mountain had been unexpected as well. Who knew that these two accidents would actually lead to his dual cultivation with Han Yunqi? Head honored elder was right. If they hadn't found Immerse's sword spirit by chance, they wouldn't have been able to find Immerse's sword spirit within a year. Now all they had left to do was reforge the sword. Long Fei Ye's first thought was of Qingchuan Water City's swordsmith, Yishao. Han Yunqi had spared Yishao and the proprietress's life back then because of the old saying that helping others was helping oneself. Yishao should be willing to help. While everyone was sighing over Immerse's Ganjiang sword spirit, Gu said coldly, "Which one of you can take away Immerse's sword spirit first? I can't take it." If he hadn't met Ganjiang, Gu would have liked Immerse's sword spirit very much. After all, with the help of Immerse's sword spirit, he would have been able to join the ranks of first-rate experts. However, in this situation, he was basically under Long Fei Ye's control. If he angered Long Fei Yi in any way, Long Fei Yi would just have to draw his sword and leave him in a daze for half a day. What a scam. Actually, the two honored elders and Granny Yu wanted to temporarily take Immerse in to experience what it was like to have a sword spirit. Unfortunately, they couldn't. Immerse's sword spirit was already powerful and had a vicious aura. It wasn't something that ordinary people could take. Gu Beiwei still felt sorry for Shao-Chi. He smiled and said, "If your highness and princess work together, you can use the power of the lust bite and the power of the phoenix to subdue Mo Xie." Back at Qingchuan Water City, Han Yunqi's phoenix power hadn't been activated yet. Otherwise, Immerse wouldn't have fallen into Gu's hands. At Gu Beiwei's reminder, Gu chuckled and looked at Han Yunqi. "Poison lass, Ganjiang and Immerse are husband and wife. If Long Fei Yi gets Ganjiang, Immerse will naturally be yours. How can Qi brother snatch something from you? Hurry up and take it back. All right?" Han Yunqi smiled innocently. Just as she was about to reply, Long Fei Yi suddenly tossed Ganjiang to Gu. Gu caught it instinctively and realized that the sword was especially heavy. "Take it back after you've forged the sword. This sword will be in your care for the time being. Keep a close eye on it. If you lose it, you'll pay with your life." Long Fei Yi's eyes were cold. He didn't finish his sentence, but it was enough to threaten Gu. The words "pay with your life" reminded Gu Qishao of something. Gu was able to subdue Immerse's sword spirit with his body because he had an immortal body. If it was Han Yunqi, who had a normal body of flesh and blood, he might not have succeeded. If it didn't work, everyone would doubt his constitution. A complicated look flashed past Gu's eyes. He held Ganjiang with both hands and didn't dare to say a word. Those who didn't know the situation would think that he was really threatened by Long Fei Yi. Just like that, Gu became Long Fei Yi's sword slave and helped carry the sword. Although forging a sword was a big deal, now wasn't the time to talk about it. The chaos in Tianshan Kenzo was still waiting for them to clean up. Kenzo's old man was unconscious and had been brought back to Jochong Hall by the disciples. The two supremacies and Granny Yu stayed behind to preside over the situation. Long Fei Yi's group of 4 brought the 2 evil sword school elders and immediately rushed to the evil sword school to save third supremacy. When they arrived at the evil sword school, they found that the evil sword school was already empty. Only a few disciples who didn't manage to escape in time were left. It didn't matter if the disciples escaped. The evil sword school's second and third elder were still in their hands. They weren't afraid that they wouldn't be able to find third supremacy. Where are they? Han Yunqi asked coldly. The second and third elders had been frightened by the great elder's death and had already submitted to Long Fei Ye's group. In the secret prison, the second elder hurriedly replied. When the second and third elders brought Han Yunqi's group to the secret prison, they found that it was already empty. Where are they? Long Fei Yi asked coldly. Third supremacy wasn't an ordinary prisoner. The three elders were at the peak of Tianshan Mountain, and Bai Yanqing wasn't in the evil sword school. Who else had the key to the prison? Chapter 1068. Looking at the empty secret prison, second elder and third elder finally remembered a person, a woman. Long Fei Yi had already noticed the undamaged lock. He asked coldly, "Who saved him?" It was... Second elder didn't know how to answer, so he simply said, "A few months ago, Sect Master brought a woman back. That woman always wore a black veil, so the two of us have never seen what she looked like. Sect Master trusts her greatly, and she also has the key to the secret prison. She must be the one who took him away. Yes, it must be her. Other than us elders, only she has the key." Third elder hurriedly added. They had no other choice. They didn't want to die, so they could only tell the truth. Who is that person? Han Yunqi asked. We don't know who that woman is either. She's very familiar with Tianshan, so it's very likely that she's from Tianshan Kenzo. Second elder answered. What kind of woman in Tianshan Kenzo could catch Bai Yanqing's eye? Could it be a disciple of the commandment courtyard? Where did Bai Yanqing go? Han Yunqi questioned. The three elders didn't understand. Who was Bai Yanqing? He's your sect master. Where did he go? Han Yunqi asked coldly. If it wasn't for something important, why would Bai Yanqing leave so easily? The two elders were shocked and blurted out, Bai Yanqing? Yes, it's Bai Yanqing. Why, you don't even know your own sect master's identity. Isn't this too ridiculous? Han Yunqi probed. The two elders looked at each other, so shocked that they didn't know what to say. They could only shake their heads. From the looks of it, other than Gong Beichen, who knew poison, no one in Evil Sword School knew Bai Yanqing's identity. How did Bai Yanqing hide his identity? How did he become Evil Sword School's sect master? Han Yunqi was very curious. Princess of Western Qin, our sect master's surname is Hua and his name is Yushu. He was promoted to the position by sect master Bai before he went into seclusion. How could it be Bai Yanqing? The second elder's face was full of disbelief. Old sect master Bai? Are you senior Bai Shanqing? Long Fei Yi asked. Yes. The second elder hesitated for a bit before helplessly saying, East Qin Crown Prince. The Evil Sword School's internal energy cultivation technique has a large flaw, and it's easy to go mad. You must have heard of it, right? So what? Long Fei Yi asked. The reason why Sect Master Hua colluded with Tianshan Kenzo's Lockhart Courtyard and the two pavilions was because of the Ganjiang sword. Sect Master Hua wanted to use the power of the Ganjiang treasured sword to cultivate his inner force to the maximum level in order to find a way to make up for it. It could also be considered finding a way out for the several hundred disciples of the Evil Sword School. The second elder honestly said. They never thought that Bai Yanqing would have studied the Evil Sword School's internal energy cultivation technique this thoroughly, knowing how to use the power of the Ganjiang treasured sword to make up for it. When did he enter the Evil Sword School? Did he change his name the entire time to enter the Evil Sword School, or did he impersonate someone halfway through? No matter what the situation was, Bai Yanqing had deceived the disciples of the Evil Sword School. This was because from the fake letters he replied to, he wanted the Ganjiang treasured sword because he was afraid it would fall into Long Fei Ye's hands. His real goal was to completely destroy the chance of her dual cultivation with Long Fei Yi. Han Yunqi understood this in her heart, and her lips curled into a cold smile. Your sect master used poison to attack Heaven Mountain, but you didn't suspect where he got the poison from? Gong Beichen's poison skills are so powerful, but you didn't suspect him? The second elder and third elder looked at each other in dismay. Finally, third elder explained, Gong Beichen had entered Hundred Poisons sect to learn about poison when he was young. But, speaking till here, Third Elder couldn't help but ask, Princess of Western Qin, how can you be sure that our sect master is Bai Yanqing? Our sect master has always been in closed-door cultivation in the mountains and only came out recently. Do you have a portrait? Han Yunqi asked. It's in the Evil Sword Pavilion. The second elder hurriedly replied. Gu Beiyue quickly made a trip to the Evil Sword Pavilion halfway up the mountain and brought back Sect Master Hua's portrait. When Han Yunqi and the rest saw the portrait, they immediately knew what was going on. This portrait was completely different from Bai Yanqing's face. They were originally worried that Bai Yanqing had grown up in the Evil Sword School and had been promoted by Shanqing. Now it seemed that the real Sect Master Hua had long been killed by Bai Yanqing, and Bai Yanqing was an imposter. In other words, they could rest assured about old sect master Bai Shanqing and Yishao. That pair of master and disciple had nothing to do with Bai Yanqing. They definitely didn't know that Bai Yanqing had impersonated the Evil Sword School's sect master. Princess of Western Qin, what exactly is going on? The second elder asked seriously. Although the two elders' attitudes were extremely good, Han Yunqi hadn't forgotten what the Evil Sword School had done to Tianshan Kenzo. She also hadn't forgotten how these two elders had tortured Kenshin's master. Just because they wanted to obtain the Ganjiang sword and save their own disciples, they could slaughter other people's disciples? Old sect master Bai Shanqing had already discussed the reconciliation between the two sects with Kenshin. Why couldn't they swallow their pride and reconcile with Tianshan Kenzo? Why did they have to use poison? Ganjiang sword aside, these people from the Evil Sword School had bad intentions. Han Yunqi wasn't in the mood to explain so much to these two elders. They still had to go back to the peak of Tianshan Kenzo to find out who the woman who took away the third venerable was. These two elders didn't even know Bai Yanqing's background. How would they know anything else? They would have interrogated him for nothing. Now it seemed that they had killed Gong Beichen too early. I believe the two elders haven't seen the Ganjiang sword before, right? Han Yunqi asked. The two elders nodded. Compared to their previous arrogance, they were more servile than slaves now. That's right. Gu is carrying the Ganjiang sword. Take a good look. Han Yunqi smiled. The two elders both looked back, but it was at this moment that two poison needles flew out of Han Yunqi's sleeves and struck them between the eyebrows. Both of them gave a start before they fainted. Han Yunqi could neutralize Bai Yanqing's poison. Bai Yanqing might not be able to neutralize Han Yunqi's poison. Han Yunqi didn't touch the disciples who didn't manage to escape in time. She allowed them to escape and let Gu Beiyue keep these two elders in the Evil Sword School's Evil Sword Pavilion. This was her provocation to Bai Yanqing in terms of poison. However, Long Fei Ye's provocation to Bai Yanqing was even more domineering. Long Fei Ye said, Gu Beiyue, when everyone has escaped, destroy the Evil Sword School for this crown prince and keep it in the Evil Sword Pavilion. Long Fei Yi wasn't just provoking Bai Yanqing. He was also telling the world that his sect, Tianshan Kenzo, would always be the authority of the martial arts world. They were not to be challenged. With Gu Beiyue taking care of things, everyone was at ease. Gu Beiyue stayed in the Evil Sword School. Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi returned to the peak of Tianshan Mountain first. Gu lowered his head and followed behind them. Gu was a person who especially liked crowds. However, he was especially quiet on the way back. It wasn't for any other reason. It was because the sword on his back was too heavy. It was so heavy that he didn't even have the strength to speak. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi used their qinggong and stepped on the leaves to fly higher and higher. Gu was having a hard time chasing after them. Who knew that at this time, Immerse's sword spirit would actually run out on its own and turn into a faint red light. After circling around Gu a few times, it covered the Ganjiang sword on his back. Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi felt the sword qi and turned back to look. They saw that the red light was gentle and faint. It lingered around the Ganjiang sword like a pair of lovers rubbing their ears together. It was very intimate. Long Fei Yi secretly decided that no matter what, he would definitely let Han Yunqi have Immerse's sword. Han Yunqi also secretly decided that no matter what, she would definitely obtain Immerse's sword. Gu didn't have any other thoughts. He just wanted to find a place to lie down at the top of Tianshan Mountain. Once they arrived at the top of Tianshan Mountain, Gu really didn't care about anything. He lay down on a high roof and panted as he looked down at Han Yunqi and the others. At this time, the whole of Tianshan Kenzo had basically calmed down. The 55 pavilion lords of the four mountains led their disciples to clean up the corpses and search for any deserters hiding in the mountains. Granny Yu brought a few disciples to take control of Lockhart Courtyard. Fortunately, there were many Nirvana cultivation manuals in Lockhart Courtyard. When Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi arrived, First Venerable and Second Venerable immediately asked about Third Venerable. Long Fei Yi told them the truth. The two Venerables and Granny Yu were very shocked. The disciples of my discipline hall will definitely not betray Kenzo. Granny Yu was very confident. Could it be a disciple of Lockhart Courtyard? Second Venerable asked. For Bai Yanqing to take a liking to someone, it had to be someone important in Kenzo. They thought about it and concluded that only a few female disciples of Lockhart Courtyard had some status. At this time, a disciple of the discipline hall hurried over. Venerable, Elder, Duanmu Yao is missing. The disciples of the discipline hall were in charge of cleaning up the top of Tianshan Mountain. The dungeons weren't their main focus, which was why they were delayed until so late. Once the disciple reported it, everyone understood what was going on. There was no doubt that Duanmu Yao had been secretly rescued by Bai Yanqing. Bai Yanqing had used Duanmu Yao's understanding of Tianshan Kenzo to secretly take control of the entire Kenzo in such a short time. They didn't expect Duanmu Yao to be able to cause such a huge commotion, even with her looks and martial arts crippled. They had underestimated her. We should have killed her long ago. Granny Yu was especially depressed. If not for the sake of Kenshin's sect head, she wouldn't have simply locked up Duanmu Yao as the head of the discipline hall. Han Yunqi's eyes flashed with a chilly light before she said, "She better not fall into this princess's hands." Duanmu Yao had fled with Second Venerable to seek refuge with Bai Yanqing. Heaven knows where Bai Yanqing had hidden himself this time. Fei, dual cultivation is more important. You should find a swordsmith as soon as possible, Head Venerable said. After the internal strife, Tianshan Kenzo's vitality had been greatly damaged. There were many things waiting to be done, so it would be best if Long Fei Yi, the senior disciple of Kenzo, stayed behind to preside over the situation. Still, Head Venerable had a sense of urgency. After some hesitation, Long Fei Yi murmured, "We'll leave after Master wakes up." Head Venerable, I remember that Hidden Sword Depository has plenty of high-quality Ganjiang sword imitations. There are a few, but you're thinking. Head Venerable didn't understand. Han Yunqi laughed and muttered, "We'll beat them at their own game. Don't tell anyone that Long Fei Yi has subdued Ganjiang." Chapter 1069. After such a huge commotion in Tianshan Kenzo, many disciples from the Evil Sword School and the residents and depositories had fled. Naturally, it was impossible to keep the news under wraps. Even if they could, Duanmu Yao would still tell Bai Yanqing about the changes in Celestial Mountain as soon as possible. Even so, Han Yunqi's group could still beat her at her own game. That was because they were the only ones who knew that Long Fei Yi had subdued the Ganjiang sword. Meanwhile, the second and third elders of the Evil Sword School had been killed despite being unconscious. Since Bai Yanqing had set his sights on Ganjiang and wanted to ruin their dual cultivation, they had to create a false impression that Bai Yanqing had sealed the sword away instead of subduing it. Just what is Bai Yanqing planning? What is he afraid of? Long Fei Yi asked with furrowed brows. He still couldn't figure it out. With Bai Yanqing's strength, there was no need for him to hide from them or scheme against them. If they really fought, Bai Yanqing would have a better chance of winning. But Bai Yanqing seemed to be hiding from them and scheming against them the entire time. It was impossible to tell what his motives were. First, he wasn't fighting for the Wind Clan, and second, he didn't want their lives. What did he want? Han Yunqi was lost as well, while the two honored elders and Granny Yu were even more lost. They only rejoiced that Fei had arrived in time, or else Tianshan Kenzo's centuries-old foundation would have been destroyed in a single day. At this moment, a series of rumbling sounds came from behind the mountain. Everyone rushed to the top of the cliff and saw the Evil Sword School's buildings had all collapsed, leaving only the Evil Sword Depository standing above the rubble. It stood out like a sore thumb. Soon enough, Gu Beiwei returned. The two honored elders personally went to rebuild the sword ceiling platform while Granny Yu shouldered everyone else to deal with the mess of the residence and depositories. After figuring out everything, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They stayed by Master Kenshin's bedside. Although they had once been furious and hated Master Kenshin because of Han Yunqi, Master Kenshin was still alive. However, Long Fei Yi was still very filial to his master. After sitting with Han Yunqi for a while, he asked Han Yunqi to wait outside. He wanted to inject some true qi into Master Kenshin. Han Yunqi bumped into Gu Beiwei the moment she stepped out of the door. "Princess, is Kenshin-senpai all right? Do you need my help?" Gu Beiwei was humble and respectful. "He's waiting inside. You can go in later," Han Yunqi said in a low voice. In fact, she sympathized with Kenshin's master more than she respected him. In her opinion, Kenshin was mainly responsible for the chaos in Tianshan Kenzo today. If not for Lockhart Courtyard, Sutra Depository, and Sword Depository acting as spies, no matter how capable Bai Yanqing was, he wouldn't have been able to control Tianshan Kenzo so silently, and the betrayal of the residents and depositories was ultimately due to Li Kenshin's inaction all these years. Han Yunqi naturally wouldn't say these words out loud. She was giving face to Long Fei Yi. "Princess, sit down and rest. You've been working hard for the past few days. You should find some time to rest and recuperate," Gu Beiwei said seriously. Han Yunqi sat down at the stone table in the courtyard while Gu Beiwei stood to the side. Han Yunqi was helpless. She frowned and looked at Gu Beiwei without saying a word. Gu Beiwei was calm at first, but after a while he started to feel uneasy. He consciously sat down across from Han Yunqi. This time, Han Yunqi stopped staring at him. "Ning Jing should have given birth by now, right? I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. Why hasn't there been any news from Tangli yet?" Han Yunqi had been thinking about this matter. "Princess, the matter of Tianshan must be settled as soon as possible. It will take more than 10 days to return to three-way black market. The northern expedition cannot be delayed any longer," Gu Beiwei said seriously. "I know." Han Yunqi was the most anxious. Gu Beiwei was quiet for a while. He seemed to hesitate, but he still spoke up. "Princess, may I take your pulse? What's wrong?" Han Yunqi was confused. "Princess came in to work and your complexion doesn't seem good. This subordinate is worried." Gu Beiwei calmly expressed his concern. Han Yunqi immediately reached out her hand. "I'm just a bit tired and lack of sleep. Everything else is fine," Gu Beiwei said before taking his pulse. "There's a deficiency in his qi and blood. This was an old problem. It had been like this since she left the East Qin camp. It wasn't a big problem. It was just that she was too tired and didn't have time to rest. She was always busy and lacked sleep. Even if there were many miraculous pills, it wouldn't help. Sleeping and relaxing was the best way for a woman to recover." When Han Yunqi reached over, Gu Beiwei quickly took out a small medicine pouch he carried with him and gave it to her. He gently pressed 2 fingers on Han Yunqi's pulse and seriously pondered. With Gu Beiwei's ability, he only needed a bit of time to understand a person's body, but this time he pondered for a long time. It was so long that Han Yunqi was a bit flustered. She wondered if there was a big problem with her body. When she wanted to ask, Gu lying on the roof to the side spoke first. "Gu Beiwei, what's wrong with Poison Girl?" Gu Beiwei ignored him, but Han Yunqi looked up. She hooked her finger and signaled for Gu to come down. Even if Gu was carrying Ganjiang, he would immediately fly down when he saw Han Yunqi hooking her finger. He quickly arrived in front of Han Yunqi and asked with a smile, "Poison Girl, what do you want to say?" "Shoo." Han Yunqi hooked her finger at him and didn't call for him to come down because she didn't want to alarm the surrounding people. She said in a low voice, Find a black cloth to wrap Ganjiang and disguise it. Don't let anyone see that you're carrying a sword. Understand? There were many people who knew that Gu had Emosie's sword spirit. If Gu also carried a sword on his back, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. Therefore, it was better to disguise it. Ganjiang was already very heavy. Wouldn't it be even heavier if it was disguised? If this had been instructed by Long Fei Yi, Gu would definitely have thrown Ganjiang to Long Fei Yi. However, this had been instructed by Han Yunqi, so Gu was very straightforward. He only answered with a single word, "Okay," and immediately went to do it. After Gu left, Gu Beiyue continued to take her pulse seriously. Han Yunqi was really flustered. Although she was a doctor, she didn't pay too much attention to her own body when she was alone. She only cared about living her life as happily as possible. However, it was different now. She was especially afraid that something would happen to her. If something were to happen to her, what would happen to Long Fei Yi? Although she was flustered, she still joked, "Academy head Gu, what kind of illness do I have? You've been trying to diagnose it for so long?" Only then did Gu Beiyue let go of her hand and smiled. "It's nothing serious. You're just a little weak and need to rest and recuperate. Princess, after we're done with Tianshan, you have to rest well on the way back to Three-Way Black Market. Leave the troublesome matters to His Highness and this subordinate, all right?" "Gu Beiyue, are you lying to me?" Han Yunqi narrowed her eyes. After taking her pulse for so long, this was it? How was that possible? Gu Beiyue hurriedly got up and even knelt on one knee. "Princess, please understand. This subordinate would never dare to deceive you." Han Yunqi hurriedly got up and pulled him. "Gu Beiyue, get up. If you continue like this, Han Yunqi didn't know what to do with him. But Gu Beiyue remained kneeling, his expression serious and quiet. "It's done, it's done. I was just joking, so you can get up." At Han Yunqi's words, Gu Beiyue stood up and said, "Thank you for your understanding, Princess." For the first time, Han Yunqi had the urge to kick him. This guy looked gentle and harmless, but he was actually too hateful. Gu Beiyue's lips curved into a faint smile. It was 3 parts helpless, 7 parts doting, and extremely warm. This 7 parts doting was exclusive to Han Yunqi, but she'd never see it. Just like that, Han Yunqi was unable to ask any more questions about his pulse. Still, she didn't take it to heart. After all, Gu Beiyue wouldn't trick her. If Gu Beiyue said it was nothing serious, then it had to be fine. Soon enough, Long Fei Ye's voice came from inside the room. "Yunqi, come in. Master's awake." Han Yunqi and Gu Beiyue rejoiced as they hurried inside, only to see Elder Kenzo leaning against a pillow, his face pale. Gu Beiyue went to take his pulse without a word, while Han Yunqi only said, "Senior Kenzo," before standing to one side. Elder Kenzo's injuries weren't light, but fortunately Long Fei Ye's true qi was protecting his body. After taking his pulse, Gu Beiyue went to prescribe medicine. Long Fei Yi told Elder Kenzo everything that had happened at Celestial Mountain and their dual cultivation. Hearing the story, Elder Kenzo broke out in cold sweat for him and Han Yunqi. "Fei, everything else can wait, but we have to hurry up with the sword forging," Kenzo said seriously. Long Fei Yi only nodded. Han Yunqi knew that they would have to wait until after the northern expedition. Elder Kenzo glanced at Han Yunqi with a smile. "Lass, old man underestimated you." Han Yunqi nodded without reservation. "Yes, you underestimated me." Elder Kenzo gave a start before laughing. This girl was very proud, but she had the right to be proud. "Senior Kenzo, because you underestimated me, you hurt me mentally. That's why I think you should compensate me." Han Yunqi said seriously. "What do you want?" Kenzo asked helplessly. What else did he have besides the empty title of Kenzo Sect Master? Moreover, this girl was doted on by Fei. Why would she need anything from him? Han Yunqi said, "Give me the manual for the Xian Nu swordplay. I want to practice this set of swordplay." Elder Kenzo gave a start. Ever since Duanmu Yao was imprisoned, he'd buried this matter deep in his heart. Seeing Kenzo's dilemma, Han Yunqi said seriously, "Senior Kenzo, don't misunderstand. I'm not practicing the Xiannu swordplay to fulfill your wishes. I think that aside from Senior Luo Qingling, no one else will be able to make up for your regrets. Han Yunqi's words struck a chord with Elder Kenshin's heart. Regrets could never be made up for. A missed opportunity was a missed opportunity. Making up for it was just making up for it. Then what do you want to do? Elder Kenzo didn't understand. With Han Yunqi's current skills, one more set of Xiannu swordplay wouldn't make much of a difference. Her poison needles were more than enough to protect herself. Cold, Han Yunqi said, I want to use the Xiannu swordplay to kill Duanmu Yao. Elder Kenzo froze, while Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiwei laughed soundlessly. Long Fei Yi was especially happy. Heaven knows what he was so happy about. Chapter 1070. Han Yunqi was so focused on the Xiannu swordplay that she didn't even notice Long Fei Ye's strange behavior. Instead, it was the old man from Kenzo who glanced thoughtfully at Long Fei Yi. Only then did Han Yunqi look over. But Long Fei's face had long returned to its usual cold and solemn self. The old man was helpless. Han Yunqi didn't know what was going on and assumed that the old man wasn't planning to teach her the Xiannu swordplay. After some thought, she quickly added, Senior Kenzo, I'm sure Senior Luo wouldn't want the Xiannu swordplay to become a useless piece of paper at the bottom of a chest, right? The old man from Kenzo said seriously, Lass, you have to be proper when taking on a master. This old man doesn't feel good hearing that. How many people in the world wanted to take him as their disciple? Even though his martial arts were crippled, he still had Tianshan Kenzo's most secret sword manuals in his hands. They'd never been leaked. If this damned girl was Fei's concubine, then she should call him master just like Fei. It was fine if she didn't call him that, but now she was asking for his sword manuals without any self-awareness? He was even planning to be the martial arts master when she had children with Fei in the future and teach them personally. If he didn't take this chance to suppress her pride, how could he keep her children in check? Kenzo stroked his beard and waited for Han Yunqi to obediently kneel and call him master. But Han Yunqi only said, Senior Kenzo, since you gave the Xiannu swordplay to Senior Luo, then this sword manual should belong to Senior Luo, right? If Yunqi wants to take a master, it should be Senior Luo, right? Han Yunqi asked seriously. Li Kenshin's heart gave a lurch at her words. He couldn't refute Han Yunqi's words. Where is Senior Luo's memorial tablet? I want to go there and worship him as my master. Han Yunqi's attitude was frank. Kenshin had never thought that someone would be willing to take Luo Qingling as their master after she had passed away for so many years. He suddenly realized how wrong he was. How could he let his disciple, how could he let Duanmu Yao learn the Xiannu swordplay? This sword technique belonged to Luo Qingling. Only her disciple had the right to inherit it. Good, good. Kenshin Li was extremely excited. Girl, old man will take you there. Old man will take you there right now. Kenshin Li was seriously injured, but he insisted on getting off the bed. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiwei did not stop him either. They looked at Han Yunqi and didn't know what to say to this woman. She was so different from the rest. She was always surprising and convincing. Kenshin Li quickly brought them to a building in the 9th hall of Ninshen Hall. This building was the highest point on Celestial Mountain. Standing here, one could see the entire mountain range. Luo Qingling's memorial tablet was placed here. Kenshin Li would come here every day to offer 2 sticks of incense and chat with Luo Qingling. He would only leave when the incense burned out. After being imprisoned by the evil sword school for so long, he had been here for months. As soon as he arrived, he hurried to wipe down the memorial tablet, then the incense burner and the offering table. Han Yunqi and the rest didn't disturb Kenzo as they watched him busying himself. They simply stood outside the door and watched quietly. In the face of love, everyone was equal. No matter how high one's status or achievements were, they would always be ordinary and lowly in front of the one they loved. Han Yunqi and the rest didn't enter until the Kenzo Li was done with his work. Han Yunqi personally lit 2 sticks of incense. She looked at the small wooden tablet magnanimously and humbly. She said seriously, I, Han Yunqi, Long Fei Ye's wife, will take Senior Luo Qingling as my master today. In the future, I will devote myself to practicing the Xiannu swordsmanship and pass it on to the martial arts world. Han Yunqi then knelt down without hesitation. Master, please accept a bow from your disciple. Han Yunqi seriously kowtowed 3 times, causing the sword sect master's heart to fill with emotions at the sight. He was so moved that he couldn't speak. Luo Qingling also had a disciple. He knew that from now on, Luo Qingling's name would no longer be sealed in this small building. The Xiannu swordsmanship would no longer be a memory. There would be legends of her in the martial arts world. Long Fei Yi looked at Han Yunqi's back and was a little dazed. Her self-introduction was so simple and straightforward. I, Han Yunqi, Long Fei Ye's wife. She didn't recognize any of the 3 identities: daughter of the Han family, Qin Wangfei, or princess of Western Qin. She only recognized one identity, his wife. Long Fei Ye's wife. He swore to himself that he would give these 4 words the greatest glory, surpassing any identity or status in this world. After becoming his disciple, Kenshin gave the Xiannu swordsmanship to Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi had the nirvana internal strength at the peak level. In fact, she had already overcome the first obstacle in practicing the Xiannu swordsmanship. She only needed to master the 7 major sword styles in the Xiannu swordsmanship. She spent 3 days reading the original swordsmanship. There were only 3 or 4 parts that she didn't understand. She could learn the rest by herself. Only then was Kenshin stunned by Han Yunqi's talents. He assumed that Han Yunqi would need at least a month to fully understand the swordsmanship. Kenshin had to admit that Duanmu Yao wasn't even a tenth of Han Yunqi's talent. Moreover, Han Yunqi's talents far surpassed Luo Qingling's in the past. Today, he told Long Fei Yi in private, "Fei, this woman is your great fortune." Long Fei only smiled and didn't reply. In 3 days, the 2 honored elders finished repairing the sword sealing platform. They took out a high-quality replica of the Ganjiang sword and locked it onto the platform. Then they stood guard on the left and right sides of the platform, exerting their strength to surround the platform with sword qi. This might not be enough to fool Bai Yanqing, but it could at least interfere with his judgment. Over the next 3 days, he also discussed the matter of forging a new sword. As the saying goes, one needs to sharpen a sword every 10 years. How could a single year be enough to make a good sword? Moreover, a sword that could withstand Mosie's sword spirit couldn't even be described as a good sword anymore. Forging a sword was no simple task. No matter how capable Yi Xiao was, he couldn't avoid the awkwardness of a cleverest housewife cooking without rice. They not only needed to find a suitable material but a suitable fire as well. Fei, forging a sword is the most important task. Let's put the northern expedition on hold for now. The sword sect master tried his best to persuade him. The 2 venerables had the same opinion. They nodded and hoped that Li Jianxin, as the master, would be able to persuade his disciple. Long Fei Yi didn't speak. He had long discussed this with Han Yunqi. Whether it was saving lives or the northern expedition, neither could be delayed. That was what they owed Eastern and Western Qin, as well as the Ningcheng siblings and Mu Ling. Han Yunqi thought it over, then said, "Celestial fire. If we want it to be fast, we'll have to use celestial fire to refine it. If we can find something that can withstand celestial fire, we'll be able to forge Mosie's sword in no time." Yunqi, where are you going to find something that can withstand celestial fire? Kenzo asked immediately. The earthly fire Kuan furnace. Ah, that thing's useless if you don't use it to forge a sword. An arrogant voice came from outside the door. Who else could it be but Gu? Han Yunqi jumped to her feet in delight. That's right. That furnace can do it. Gu Beiwei was thrilled as well. It's all thanks to Qi Xiao for thinking of this. The copper from the earthly fire Kuan furnace is perfect. The earthly fire Kuan furnace could withstand the heat of the earthly fire without being burned down, so it wouldn't be destroyed by celestial fire. Now that the furnace had lost its earthly fire, it could be melted down by celestial fire. Long Fei Yi didn't say a word, but he nodded his head. Kenzo and the two honored elders were pleasantly surprised as well, but Kenzo quickly asked, "About this matter, could Pill Master?" Before he could finish, Gu cut him off. "Leave this to me. Long Fei Yi. Take Yi Shao to medicine requesting cave as soon as possible. The sooner, the better." Gu walked in with a guqin on his back. His figure was tall, and his red robes were enchanting. His looks were enough to topple cities, and his smile was bewitching. Those who didn't know better might think he was a guqin master who wandered the world with a guqin as his companion, confident and at ease. But everyone present knew that Ganjiang was hidden inside his guqin, so it wasn't easy for him to carry it on his back. Actually, it wasn't just Gu. Even the two honored elders had trouble carrying Ganjiang. Only Long Fei Yi, who was the owner of Ganjiang, could easily hold the sword and unsheath it. Gu wished he could quickly reforge Emosie's sword, so that Long Fei Yi could take back Ganjiang and let Emosie's sword spirit leave his body. And before Emosie's sword spirit left him, he wouldn't easily offend Long Fei Yi, because if Long Fei Yi pulled out the sword, he would be stupid. With Gu asking, the old man of alchemy would not refuse. Han Yunqi was a bit embarrassed. After all, she was the one who gave the earthly fire Kuan furnace to the old man of alchemy. Not only did she have to take it back, she might even destroy his precious furnace. This couldn't be justified. In the end, Han Yunqi personally prepared a large gift and had someone send it over. This large gift was none other than the snake pellet she obtained from the snake cave near the East Qin army camp. This thing was an extremely good supplement for refining pills. It was something that alchemists could only come across and not ask for. That day, Long Fei Yi personally wrote a letter and had someone send it to Su Donglin. He had Su Donglin personally deliver it to Yi Shao. The matter of forging the sword could be considered settled. Even if Bai Yanqing knew that Gu had obtained Emosie's sword spirit, he couldn't guess where Emosie's sword spirit came from. He also didn't know that there was a person like Yi Shao. However, Long Fei Yi was still cautious. He ordered someone to spread the news that he and Han Yunqi had left Tianshan Mountain and were heading to the desert in the west in search of iron to forge the sword. When this news was released, Han Yunqi also had people spread several false rumors. Some said that she and Long Fei Yi had gone to northern Li. Some said that she and Long Fei Yi had gone to Jiangnan. And some said that she and Long Fei Yi had continued to stay on Tianshan Mountain. These false rumors were enough to confuse Bai Yanqing's judgment. When the matter of forging the sword was settled, Granny Yu came to the 9th temple. In the past few days, Granny Yu had already imprisoned the traitors and made an inventory of the losses in the scripture depository and sword depository. She also sent people to temporarily manage the affairs of the two pavilions. Elder Kenzo had always wanted to pass the position of sect head to Long Fei Yi, but how could a busy man like Long Fei Yi stay at the peak of Tianshan Kenzo all the time? Right now, there were no suitable candidates in Kenzo either. Granny Yu was worried that once Long Fei Yi's group left, Kenzo would fall into internal strife. After all, after this incident, the pavilion masters and disciples of the 55 sword pavilions would be bitterly disappointed with the peak of Mount Tianshan. Now that the two pavilions and two courtyards of the same sect were without a leader, the competition between the remaining disciples would definitely be more intense than before. "Fei, why don't you stay here for a month or two and stabilize the situation first?" Granny Yu advised earnestly. "I can't do that." Han Yunqi was the first to speak. How could the elders of Tianshan Mountain understand their anxiety? There was no point in explaining, so Han Yunqi gave Elder Kenzo and Granny Yu an idea. Chapter 1071. Han Yunqi said to Elder Kenzo and Granny Yu, "Tianshan Kenzo's management and promotion system is not only rigid, but also unfair. First, it's not conducive to management. Second, it breeds corruption. And third, it leads to cliques. In my opinion, sect master should use this opportunity to abolish the 55 pavilions, as well as the two courtyards and two pavilions rules of accepting disciples. Even the two supremacies, who hadn't been involved in the affairs of Tianshan Kenzo, looked over. The 55 sword pavilions and the two courtyards had existed since Tianshan Kenzo's ancient times. To enter Tianshan Kenzo, one had to first become a disciple of one of the 55 pavilions. Then, through a martial arts competition, one could ascend to the peak of Tianshan Mountain and enter Lockhart Courtyard to learn the Nirvana Mantra. This rule had been in place for hundreds of years. How could it be changed so easily? Seeing the elder's troubled expressions, Han Yunshi said coldly, "The ancient rules can't be changed, but people's hearts are not what they used to be. If there's a better system, why not change it?" Elder Kenzo glanced at Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi continued to drink his tea, seemingly having no intention of interrupting. Elder Kenzo knew his disciple too well. He knew that even if he didn't agree with Han Yunshi, when he passed the position to Long Fei Yi in the future, Long Fei Yi would still listen to Han Yunshi. "What brilliant plan do you have? Why don't you share it with us?" Elder Kenzo finally relented. Han Yunshi said, "Those who accept disciples don't manage affairs, and those in charge don't accept disciples. Abolish Lockhart Courtyard, Scripture Pavilion, and Sword Pavilion, and retain Commandment Courtyard. Anyone who enters Tianshan Mountain can only join the 55 sword pavilions. They can only have one master for life." Everyone listened quietly. Even Gu Beiwei and Gu, who were outsiders, were interested. Han Yunshi continued, "Granny, you will continue to manage Commandment Courtyard and the entire sect's Commandment Courtyard. Scripture Pavilion and Sword Pavilion will be temporarily managed by the Supremacies. As for Lockhart Courtyard, abolish it. The pavilion masters of the 55 sword pavilions would arrange for their disciples to cultivate the Nirvana Mantra. Those who have reached the second level of the Nirvana Mantra and above will have the opportunity to enter the Hidden Sword Pavilion and the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion to choose a treasure sword and a sword manual." When Han Yunshi said this, the Kenzo old man stroked his beard and nodded. "That's a good idea, Granny," you murmured. "This way, the disciples at the foot of the mountain will have more chances. At least it's relatively fair. Only with fairness can we truly convince the masses," Han Yunshi said seriously. In the past, Tianshan Kenzo's selection system only had a few opportunities to compete every few years. Once the contestants failed, they would have to wait for another few years. But now, her method did not have a time limit. No matter when, as long as the disciples could advance, they would have the opportunity to come into contact with treasured swords and better sword manuals. He did not have to wait bitterly for the Sword Arts Conference, nor did he have to wait in fear for others to choose him. Practicing martial arts should be like this. Whoever is capable, go up. The two supremacies looked at each other and agreed with Han Yunshi's method. Han Yunshi continued, "The two supremacies will only be in charge of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and the Hidden Sword Pavilion for 3 years. After 3 years, the Sword Arts Conference will be held. Regardless of whether the master of the Hidden Sword Pavilion or the disciples of the Hidden Sword Pavilion, they can all participate. The winner will be in charge of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion." When she said this, Granny Yu was the first to applaud. Such a huge temptation was enough to make the disciples concentrate on practicing swordsmanship for the next 3 years. Being in charge of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion was the most lucrative job. All traitors will be expelled from Kenzo, and any relatives of the traitors' 3 clans will not be accepted into the sect, Han Yunshi said seriously. Her punishment was really ruthless. If the traitors' 3 clans were not allowed to enter Tianshan Kenzo, how would those traitors have the face to stay in their clans and the martial arts world? And in the future, who would dare to easily betray Tianshan Kenzo? Granny Yu liked this method of punishment so much that she secretly wrote Han Yunshi's words into the sect's rules. Kenzo hoped that Long Fei Yi would inherit the position of sect master, but she hoped that Han Yunshi would be in charge of the abstinence courtyard. With Han Yunshi around, Tianshan Kenzo's discipline would be especially good. "Supremacies, what do you think?" Kenzo asked seriously. "The sect master will be in charge of the internal affairs of the sect," the great supremacies said seriously. With these words, Kenzo could make the decision. He said to Granny Yu, "Let the news out first to calm the hearts of the people. We'll have to discuss the details slowly." Indeed, Han Yunshi only gave a rough idea. Kenzo still had to discuss a complete management and promotion system with Granny Yu and the others. Once Kenzo's situation stabilized, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi could leave without worries. Duanmu Yao didn't show up these days, and there was no news of her. With the third supremacies in Duanmu Yao's hands, Han Yunqi and the others could only deal with the situation by sticking to the status quo. After Han Yunqi figured out all the problems with the Mystic Fairy Swordbook, she secretly left the mountain with Long Fei Yi, Gu Beiyue, and Gu. With Su Donglin not around, Gu Beiyue naturally took over Su Donglin's duties. He had arranged for a carriage and rations to be waiting at the foot of the mountain. Han Yunqi said as soon as she saw the carriage, "Let's ride horses. It'll be faster." "Princess, everyone hasn't rested for months. If we keep rushing around like this, our bodies won't be able to take it. It's going to be a tough battle in Northern Li, so we can use this chance to rest for a few days," Gu Beiyue said seriously. Hearing this, Long Fei Yi pulled Han Yunqi onto the carriage. The difference between riding a carriage and riding a horse was only 4 or 5 days. Since Gu Beiyue had spoken, he naturally couldn't let Han Yunqi ride a horse. Han Yunqi had no choice but to sit obediently in the carriage. Gu Qishao looked at Gu Beiyue, his heart filled with gratitude. He immediately slipped into the back of the carriage and took down the Ganjiang sword. Just like that, the two carriages secretly left Tianshan Kenzo. Su Donglin had gone to find Yishao, so only Bailey Mingxiang was left to take care of Chu Shifeng. Long Fei Yi had given orders for Chu Shifeng to recover his martial arts before heading to Three-Way Black Market. There hadn't been much progress on Chu Tiannin's side, so Long Fei Yi's group didn't stop by Western Zhou to meet him. Instead, they headed straight for Three-Way Black Market. Before leaving Celestial Mountain, Long Fei Yi had ordered Bailey Yuanlong to prepare for the northern expedition. He and a few deputy generals would be on standby at Three-Way Black Market to prepare for a meeting with the D-Clan. Tang Li had also finished communicating with the D-Clan and was waiting for everyone to arrive before taking action. But Long Fei Yi's group received bad news while they were still on the road. Ning Nua had sent a letter to Bai Yuqiao, but Bai Yuqiao hadn't replied for half a month. In the past, secret letters were often delayed as well. After all, it wasn't convenient for Bai Yuqiao's side to deliver letters. But at most, he'd delayed a letter for 10 days. There had never been so many days without a reply. Ning Nua and Tang Li both suspected that something had happened at Tiger's prison. Everyone was shocked when they heard the news. What else could have happened at Tiger's prison? It had to be Bai Yuqiao who'd exposed himself. Although this wouldn't affect the current situation much, it was a matter of life and death for the hostages, especially Ning Cheng. Han Yunqi wanted to abandon the carriage and ride back on horseback. After all, they'd rested for a few days, so Long Fei Yi had no objections. But who knew that just as the Shadow Guard arranged for a few horses to come over, Gu would inexplicably have a stomachache. He had to lie on his back to feel more comfortable. Han Yunqi and Gu Beiyue both examined him. He wasn't poisoned or sick. Both of them were at their wits' end. Even Gu Qishao was baffled. "What's wrong with me?" If not for the presence of Gu Beiyue, the doctor, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi would have suspected that Gu was faking it. Why was he in such a strange pain? Was it a coincidence? "You really can't find the cause?" Long Fei Yi asked seriously. "I'm afraid it has something to do with his body constitution. We still have to observe him. Let's take the carriage. It's only a day or two away anyway," Gu Beiyue said softly. Although their whereabouts weren't exposed, they still had to be careful. They couldn't let Gu be too far away from them. It had to be known that, if Bai Yanqing suddenly came, only Gu could guarantee their absolute safety. Long Fei Yi didn't hesitate. He had the Shadow Guard change the horses in the carriage and the group continued to move forward. Gu laid on the carriage and gradually didn't hurt as much. But as soon as he sat up, he immediately felt pain again. He could only lie down obediently. Gu Beiyue stayed by his side. Seeing his depressed appearance, a sly look flashed past his eyes. He looked out of the window and chuckled to himself. Han Yunqi and the others were anxious on the road. Tang Li and Ning Nua were anxious in Three-Way Black Market. Tang Li was on the verge of losing control. He wanted to go to Tiger's prison alone several times. Fortunately, the shadow guard saw him and stopped him. In the end, the shadow guard had no choice but to lock him in the room. The due date had long passed, but he couldn't be sure if Ningjing had successfully given birth to the child or if Ningjing and the child were still safe and sound. He knew nothing about Tiger's prison. How could he calm down? At this time, he was very regretful. He regretted being so righteous and sensible in the past. He didn't know how many times he had slapped himself in the face. He hated himself and felt that he was a good-for-nothing. In the dead of night, the banging on the door made the dozens of shadow guard nearby tremble in fear. "Let me out. Do you hear me? I order you all to let me out. I'm telling you, if you don't let me out, when my brother comes back, I'll kill you all. Do you hear me? I'll get out one day. I'll kill you all." Tang Li crazily kicked and slammed the door. The shadow guards were at the door. Even though they were trembling in fear, they were still prepared to capture Tang Li if he slammed the door and came out. If Tang Li went to Tiger's prison at this juncture, he would really be courting death. The number of ambushes at Tiger's prison had doubled. Ning Chang still hadn't agreed to cooperate with Juni Xie. Although Juni Xie was still waiting for Ning Chang to change his mind, he was also prepared for revenge. "Ning Chang, I'll give you 5 more days. Think it over carefully. If you can't cooperate," Juni Xie sneered. "This prince doesn't mind destroying both jade and common stone. This prince doesn't care about this world anymore." Since he couldn't win against Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi, he didn't want to fight anymore. Let the eastern and western Qin conquer the northern Qin. Even if he had to abandon the 3 armies, he would lure Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi to Tiger's prison and perish together. After Juni Xie finished speaking, he fed Ning Chang an antidote and left in a huff. However, before he reached the door, Ning Chang spoke. He said, "Juni Xie, if you help me with something, I'll consider it carefully." Juni Xie was overjoyed, but he didn't show it. He turned his back to Ning Chang and asked coldly, "What is it?" "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.